Captain Rogers and Tony Stark sat on opposite sides of the briefing table, each nursing a cup of coffee. Steve broke the silence first. I'm telling you, his tone didn't betray a single lie, and when you match that with the future visions Lucian shared, it starts to make sense. Tony snorted. So you really think the army that just dropped through that wormhole is made up of godlike aliens? Bruce Banner leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Ancient myths aren't born out of thin air. To people on a primitive Earth, an alien civilization with our level of technology would look divine. If Odin, Thor, and Loki came from, let's call it the gods' domain, their visits would have been recorded as legends. In that context, it's entirely plausible that Loki, seeing an opportunity to usurp the throne, would bring a full-scale invasion to Midgard, eliminate Thor, and then consolidate his rule. Tony's eyes narrowed. So your theory is that Loki wants to kill Thor, and then take over our planet? Why would he bother with us? At the far end of the room, Thor, fresh from his last mission, heard his name. His face drained of color and tightened with anger. He rose to his feet, hammer clutched in one hand. Enough speculation, he thundered. If Loki truly plans to betray the realms, then we stop theorizing and start acting. Tony stared at Thor in disbelief. No, you're still not seeing it, he said. Your brother Loki is pulling the strings here. Didn't he push you to go to Jotunheim? And now Odin shows up, exiles you, and suddenly Loki has a shot at the throne. It's classic scheming. Thor bristled. When did he encourage me? I volunteered to go, and Loki was the one begging me to stay. He shook his head, unimpressed by this mortal's conspiracy theory. Insult my brother again, even for Lucian's sake, and you'll regret it. Tony rolled his eyes. With thinking like that, why worry about aliens invading? Those guys would probably just ask for directions. He gave Thor a pitying look. Either this was some deranged lunatic pretending to be a god, or if it really was Thor, he was all brawn and no brains. According to my psychic readings, he isn't lying, Lucian said, his tone grave. I've detected a powerful energy within him, one that mirrors the Stormbreaker's power, but it's completely sealed away. He met their eyes. If he truly is the god of thunder, our task is clear. We must find a way to return him to the god realm. There, he can stop Loki from usurping the throne, and in doing so, prevent the war that would ravage both our world and theirs. Lucian didn't bother to correct the various misconceptions buzzing among his allies. In the end, it didn't matter how they arrived at the plan. So long as Loki was captured and locked in the god realm's prison, he'd never be able to side with Thanos. Without Loki's help, Thanos couldn't open the portal through the Space Stone to bring his forces to Earth, and the invasion would never happen. What remained was the thorny issue of explaining this strategy to Thanos and the Zatori soldiers, a conversation Lucian very much dreaded. He offered them a tight-lipped smile. Thank you for your willingness to help, he said, but I'm afraid this is something you can't be part of. If Father God doesn't forgive me, I'll never be able to return to the divine realm, Thor muttered, his broad shoulders sagging under the weight of his words. When Lucian and the others volunteered to help, Thor's expression softened. Though a spark of anger still lingered over their earlier slander of his brother, the hope in his eyes was unmistakable. Then come with me back to town, he said at last. We'll talk it through. There must be a way. Lucian stepped forward and gave Thor's shoulder an encouraging clap. Let's head into town and discuss our plan. But first, if we can pull Mjolnir free, perhaps it will help you reclaim your divine power. Thor nodded. Very well. They gathered around the fallen hammer, all eager to test their strength against the legendary weapon. Logan, Wolf, Erine, was first. He crouched low, both hands wrapped firmly around the haft, and heaved with all his might. The hammer didn't budge. Immediately afterward, Tony Stark powered up his suit's repulsors and tried in earnest, but even the armored genius failed to move it by so much as an inch. Seeing Wolverine and Stark come up empty, Bruce Banner and Betty Ross exchanged a glance. Each gave the handle a short, half-hearted tug, and then stepped back. Banner shook his head, unwilling to transform into the Hulk for the task, and Lucian didn't push him further. The group stood in silence, gazing at Mjolnir's unmoved form. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear this challenge would require more than brute strength. Together, they turned toward the town gates, resolved to find another way. At last, it was Captain America's moment. Few believed he stood a chance. Steve Rogers' super soldier strength paled next to the mechanical might of Tony Stark's armor. But Lucian's eyes narrowed. Steve was their only hope. If Odin truly lay in enchanted slumber, then Captain America could lift Mjolnir and wield the power of Thor. The four Avengers had quietly worked out a combined maneuver. Steve stepped forward and planted his feet. He wrapped both hands around the hammer's handle, bracing himself for a titanic effort. To his astonishment, Mjolnir slid free with almost comical ease, nearly wrenching him off balance. A jolt of energy shot through his limbs, pure, crackling power he'd never known. He floated a breath, marveling, "It's so light." Then, without fully realizing what he was doing, Steve swung the hammer skyward. In that instant, a bolt of lightning split the heavens, striking down with a roar that echoed across the battlefield. How could this be happening? Thor's roar split the air as he staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. Before him stood Steve Rogers, a mere mortal, who had not only lifted Mjolnir but effortlessly summoned its power. A jagged bolt of lightning crackled from the enchanted hammer, illuminating the shattered ground at their feet. Thor's mind reeled. Odin's decree was clear. Only the worthy may claim Mjolnir. Yet here was a human wielding the storm. Fury and confusion warred within him. "Give it back," he thundered, charging forward. Steve met him calmly and returned the hammer. It was, after all, Thor's birthright. Yet the moment Thor grasped the handle, Mjolnir slipped from his hand and thudded to the earth. He strained, muscles bulging, but the hammer would not budge. Shock briefly eclipsed his rage as he realized he was now as unworthy as any lowly mortal. "Excellent work, Captain," Lucian whispered to himself, heart racing. This changed everything. If Steve could command Mjolnir while Thor was denied its power, they finally held a weapon capable of ending the threat of the Destroyer. The Destroyer, a fearsome automaton forged from Uru metal and imbued with Odin's own might, had proven immune to conventional arms and even to Loki's diminished enchantments. Its magic resistance was legendary. Only an artifact on par with Mjolnir could break through its indestructible shell. With Captain America now bearing the hammer's power, the tide of battle might yet turn. Hope flared in Lucian's chest. The final confrontation was at hand. How could a mere mortal? Loki's thoughts raced as he strode through the gilded halls of the god realm. He had lulled Odin into an enchanted slumber, seized the throne of Asgard, and exiled the three warrior champions along with the war goddess Sif to the far corners of the Nine Realms. Now, with the Allfather's seat firmly beneath him, his only remaining concern was his banished brother. With a flick of his staff, Loki summoned a crystal scrying orb and peered into its swirling depths. At first, relief washed over him when he saw Thor, stripped of hammer and honor, stumbling through the wreckage of an American military base. But that relief vanished in an instant. Standing amid the ruins was a young man named Lucian. He approached Mjolnir's battered form with calm determination. In one fluid motion, Lucian lifted the hammer, and thunder answered his call. Lightning crackled across storm-dark skies, illuminating Lucian's resolute face as he claimed the power of the Thunder God. Loki's grip tightened on his staff. His carefully laid plans had never accounted for this. A single human, deemed worthy to wield divine might. And in that moment, Loki realized that Lucian would be his most formidable challenge yet. Chapter 182, Abducting Thor, third update. I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I have the Spear of Eternity, and I'm already king of Asgard. What do I care about a broken hammer? Loki exhaled slowly, dispelling the peaking enchantment he'd placed on the scene below. He'd expected another chance to mock Thor, but instead he'd become the joke. Mjolnir was the birthright of the Asgardian heir, always Thor's alone to wield. Loki had tried countless times to lift it, and had never come close. Now that Thor's divine power was gone, the hammer lay stranded, but to Loki's mortification, a mere human had heaved it aloft without effort. Worse than a mortal? No matter, Loki murmured. Greater matters call. He had planned to swoop down, play one last trick on his dim-witted brother, and drive him so mad with despair that he'd never think of reclaiming the throne. But below, Thor was flanked by several battle-hardened mortals, heroes who would turn any ambush into chaos. Loki's lips curled into a thin smile as he dismissed the idea. There was only one priority now: journey to Jotunheim, seek out Laufey, king of the frost giants, and set the next phase of his scheme in motion. Lucian's plan was simple yet audacious. Before Odin stirred from his enchanted slumber, he would hunt down Laufey, the frost giant who had murdered the All-Father, and claim the Bifrost for himself. With its rainbow bridge at his command, he'd obliterate Jotunheim, avenging Odin's death and securing his own legend. From the lowliest spirits of Vanaheim to Queen Frigga herself, every being in the 9 realms would hail him as the greatest hero in history. Back on Midgard, Lucian spotted Thor collapsed on the grass, arms wrapped tightly around his knees, eyes glazed with shock. He turned to Steve Rogers and quietly said, "Rogers, grab Mjolnir." Steve nodded and lifted the enchanted hammer without effort. Lucian offered Thor an arm and helped him to his feet. Together with Steve, he began leading the Thunder God toward the nearby village. Just in time, he hoped, for the arrival of 3 Asgardian warriors and the war goddess Sif. A moment later, the roar of an engine cut through the tense air. A battered motorhome skidded to a halt beside them. The door swung open, and 3 figures stepped out. Jane Foster, her lab coat streaked with dust but her eyes blazing with concern. Professor Eric Selvig, her mentor, whose kindly face wore a look of anxious relief. And Daisy Johnson, Eric's enthusiastic young assistant. Jane darted forward. "Thor, are you all right?" she called, dropping to her knees beside him. Thor looked up, surprise and relief softening his storm-gray features. Jane gently brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Jane had remained in her laboratory ever since their last parting, her thoughts consumed by Thor's noble presence. When she heard whispers of his hammer's astonishing power, she insisted on seeing it for herself. Worried for her safety, Eric persuaded her to bring along Daisy for extra support. As Jane helped Thor to steady himself, Lucian stepped back and watched the reunion. The bonds between gods and mortals were unpredictable, but they just might tip the balance in the looming war for the 9 realms. Lucian steadied himself as Thor rose unsteadily to his feet. The god of thunder looked exhausted, his armor battered, his hammer dented. Lucian's heart tightened. Thor had risked everything to protect Jane Foster, the brilliant astrophysicist nursing a secret crush on him ever since his power returned. But now, after that brutal assault, none of it seemed enough. "Professor Erickson," Lucian called, spotting the familiar figure struggling to help Jane from the rubble. "Dr. Banner! Dr. Ross!" Lucian added, relief flooding him as Bruce Banner and Betty Ross recognized one another. Once inseparable research partners, Bruce and Betty had been torn apart when Banner became the Hulk, hunted relentlessly by General Ross himself and S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives. Now, against all odds, they stood together again. A bright voice cut through the tension. "You, Iron Man, Tony Stark, and your Angel." A young woman darted forward, eyes wide with excitement. Daisy, one of Jane's undergraduates, had been tagging along for extra credit. Only last night she'd watched a viral video of Iron Man and Angel battling a legion of robotic soldiers in Queens. Now here they were, alive in the flesh. Lucian blinked. "Angel?" He hesitated, then touched his chest, realization dawning. "I guess that's my nickname," he said with a modest shrug. Daisy's attention snapped back to him. She pointed at the gleaming shield strapped to his back. "Wait, you look just like Captain America. Are you him?" Lucian chuckled, unclipping the shield. "No," he said, stepping forward to offer Daisy a reassuring smile. "I'm Lucian. I'm just here to help." With that, the ragged team Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, Betty Ross, Jane Foster, and Lucian formed a makeshift circle amid the smoking wreckage. Whatever had come at them wouldn't stand a chance now that they were reunited. Together, they readied themselves for whatever might follow next. Didn't Captain America sacrifice himself? Daisy's voice trembled as she stared at the man standing behind Lucian. "It can't be," she whispered. Then, spotting Steve Rogers in his familiar uniform, she let out a high-pitched scream. "What about me? What happens to me?" Before anyone could answer, Wolverine stepped forward, the faint metallic glint of his claws sheathed but unmistakable. Daisy's eyes went wide. "I don't know him," she blurted in panic. Logan frowned. "You just said you read our comics." Yes, but that's all fiction." Daisy backed away. "Real people, no, I've never met him." Lucian held up a hand to calm the group. "Enough. We're all here now. Let's head back to Old Bridge Town and sort this out properly." By evening, they'd returned to the little rental cottage Jane Foster had secured on the edge of town. Thor sat in the center of the cramped living room, eyeing Mjolnir as if it might spring to life. Around him, Lucian, Steve, Logan, and Jane formed a silent circle. Daisy hovered nervously by the doorway. Jane cleared her throat and opened her notebook. We've ruled out environmental interference. No anti-magic fields, no strange energy fluctuations. Nothing in the immediate area is blocking your connection to the hammer. Logan nodded. We even tested the physics. No electromagnetic interference. It's like the hammer is rejecting you, and only you. Thor frowned, lifting Mjolnir by the handle and trying to will it to rise. It stayed stubbornly on the floor. By my crown, he muttered. I cannot lift it. Lucian stepped forward. We've considered every possibility. Magic, physics, enchantments, even psychological barriers. The only explanation that fits every test is this. Odin never meant to punish you by stripping your power. He exiled you to Midgard as a trial. Thor's brow furrowed. A trial? To what end? Lucian met his gaze evenly. As rightful ruler of Asgard, you must lead with wisdom and compassion, not brute force. Father wanted to see if you'd learn mercy on Earth before shouldering the responsibilities of war and rulership. Thor slid back into his seat, the weight of the revelation settling on his shoulders. Around them, the room fell silent, each of them pondering what it meant for Thor, for their mission, and for the battles yet to come. Lucian laid a hand on the edge of the table where Mjolnir rested and looked up at Thor. If you can grasp the right qualities, you just might be able to lift it, he said quietly. Thor narrowed his eyes. Then how is it that he can raise the hammer? He pointed at Steve. Lucian nodded. Because Steve embodies true nobility and purity, his heart overflows with justice and kindness. Thor turned and swept his gaze across the others. And why can't they? Tony shifted in his seat, Daisy and the rest squirming under Thor's stare. Lucian offered a small, knowing smile. Each of us has flaws. Our hearts aren't quite as unspoiled, myself included. Tony crossed his arms. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I've always thought of myself as pure of heart. Daisy rolled her eyes. Pure enough to brag about it, maybe. She paused, mortified. Oops, did that come out wrong? She pressed her hand to her mouth as everyone burst into laughter. Thor sighed and stared at Mjolnir. I confess, the last 2 days I've wondered if I went about this all wrong. War can't solve every problem, and yet I still don't understand what Father meant. Lucian rose and placed a reassuring hand on Thor's shoulder. You will, he said. In time, all will become clear. Steve teaches at our school. You're welcome to drop by any time to pick his brain. We also have Professor Charles on staff. He might shed some light on the things your father mentioned. Lucian seized the moment to haul Thor back to school. If Thor's recovery isn't as rapid as it was in the original story, there's no harm in keeping him close for a bit. Besides, if Thor ever needs to return to Asgard or fetch something from there, it'll be far more convenient with him on our campus. Tony leaned back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. That electric god of yours, he said, nodding at Thor, might want to crack open War and Peace. Who knows? You might make sense of it after a few chapters. Thor's ever-honorable gaze flicked toward Jane. Is that book available here? Jane considered for a moment. I don't have a hard copy, but Daisy's tablet is loaded with ebooks. I can download it for you right away. Daisy shot her a glare. No way. I've been meaning to catch up on Two Broke Girls tonight. She tapped her phone. There's a bookstore down the street that definitely has War and Peace. I'll swing by tomorrow and pick it up. While Lucian watched the banter with amusement, entertained by their laughter and eager for the Destroyer's appearance the next day, something entirely unexpected stirred in the realm of the gods. Loki had sensed that trouble was brewing and decided to strike before his enemies could act. With a casual flick of his wrist, he called out, Heimdall, the god's domain can manage without your watchful eye for a while. When Heimdall hesitated, gripping his sword in stunned silence, Loki's lips curved in satisfaction. He channeled the frosty might of the ancient winter coffin, and in an instant, Heimdall was encased in living ice. Leaving the Guardian immobilized, Loki seized Odin's eternal spear and thrust it toward the sky. Brilliant light erupted as the rainbow bridge shimmered open, and through the portal stepped Laufey, the formidable leader of the frost giants. Loki's coup was complete. Asgard would soon fall under a chilling new reign. Chapter 183, Unexpected summoning. Loki stormed into Asgard's glittering throne hall, the eternal spear clutched in his hand. Heimdall fell frozen in place at his feet. Behind him trudged Laufey and a handful of frost giants. Their target lay beyond the great doors, Odin himself, the Allfather, deep in slumber. Before the Asgardian guards could mount a defense, Loki cut through them like a blade through mist. Laufey barreled forward in a furious charge, hoping to strike Odin first, but Loki grit his teeth. He held back, just until the moment was right. As Laufey lunged at the slumbering king, Loki thrust the eternal spear forward. A blast of raw power hurled Laufey across the marble floor. He barely had time to recover before Loki jabbed again, the spear's energy tearing through the giant's armor and felling him instantly. Laufey's great bulk crashed to the ground, lifeless. Shock rippled through the assembled Asgardians. Loki stood over him, voice cold as ice. "Laufey, how dare you attack the Allfather in his own hall? I, Loki, son of Odin, will not suffer such treachery." At that moment, Queen Frigga rushed forward, her face a mixture of relief and alarm. She wrapped her arms around her son. "Loki, you saved your father. Thank the heavens!" Loki released her in a single stiff gesture. Anger still burned in his eyes. "Mother, they plotted in secret. I swear, the frost giants will pay dearly for this insult." Frigga placed a calming hand on his arm. "This is no minor border skirmish, my son. You must find Thor at once. Let the two of you stand together. Only then can you face Jotunheim and decide the fate of the frost giants." Loki nodded, his expression hardening with purpose. Outside the hall, the frozen wind howled, an omen of the coming storm between Asgard and Jotunheim. "Thor has been exiled by Father God. How could I possibly disobey his decree? Don't worry, mother. Leave everything to me." With that, Loki lifted Laufey's motionless form and strode from the chamber. His voice rang out across the marble corridor. "Summon every citizen and soldier of the divine realm. Assemble in the great plaza before the celestial palace. I have an urgent proclamation." 30 minutes later, the 50,000 assembled gods and warriors filled the vast square. At its center, Loki stood tall, cradling Laufey's body in his arms. "Not long ago," Loki began, his tone icy with righteous fury, "a frost giant infiltrated our treasury and failed in his attempt to seize the ancient winter casket. But now they have gone further. This audacious assassin sought to strike down our great Father God himself. If we do nothing, they will not stop at infiltration. They will come again, and next time, they may succeed." A wave of outrage swept through the crowd. Faces hardened, fists clenched. Loki raised his voice. "For the honor of the divine realm, and in my capacity as acting king, I hereby declare that we go to war with Jotunheim." A thunderous roar answered him. "For the honor of the divine realm. For the honor of the divine realm." Echoing cries of battle filled the air as the gathered host prepared to march at Loki's command. At the signal, Loki raised his hand, and the clamor of voices died away. "War always carries a price," he began, his tone calm but unyielding. "As your king, I refuse to trade the lives of our bravest warriors for the fleeting victories against the frost giants. Therefore, I will channel every ounce of the Bifrost's power to obliterate Jotunheim in a single, decisive strike, and ensure that our realm never faces their threat again." A wave of cheers washed over the crowd. Parents imagined their children safe, children thought of their parents unscathed, and warriors pictured glory unmarred by loss. Yet a few faces in the throng betrayed unease. Total destruction of Jotunheim meant erasing every living thing on that frozen world, giant and innocent alike. "This is monstrous," one dissenting voice hissed. "We cannot stand by and watch him commit genocide," another whispered. "We must find Thor in Midgard and stop this." Among the dissenters stood 3 of Asgard's finest warriors and the shield maiden Sif. As the assembly erupted in approval, they slipped quietly away, mounting their steeds and soaring toward the Rainbow Bridge. Their hope now rested on reaching Thor before Loki could turn his terrible plan into reality. Lucian's voice rang out in alarm. "Heimdall, how could this have happened?" They dashed across the great hall toward the Rainbow Bridge's control chamber, only to find Heimdall himself locked in a block of ice. His normally radiant form lay stiff and motionless, veins of frost cracking across his golden armor. With a thunderous roar, Heimdall summoned the last of his divine power. A blizzard roared through the chamber as he shattered the icy prisons encasing him. He stumbled forward, gaunt and breathless, every inch of his strength nearly spent. It was Loki, Heimdall gasped, voice ragged. He lured the frost giant here and bound me with its cold. It was all his doing. Sif whirled on him, fury blazing in her eyes. At her side, 3 veteran Asgardian warriors clenched their fists. I knew it was that treacherous snake, Sif spat. He sent us chasing Thor on Midgard to keep us from seeing his true scheme. Lucian stepped forward, glancing anxiously toward the far archways of the hall. Is it too late to stop him? Heimdall's hand shook as he raised his sword. Beyond the arch, through the grand windows of the immortal palace, Lucian could already see Loki's banner, black and green, edged with the thundering ranks of frost giants and Asgardian soldiers loyal to the trickster god. It's now or never, Heimdall rasped. He plunged his sword deep into the control rune set into the bridge's activation pedestal. Light surged along the blade, searing the runes to life. The coloring of the rainbow bridge flickered and blazed into being, waves of prismatic energy spilling outward. Heimdall fell to one knee, spent, but victorious. Lucian drew his sword and stepped forward to guard the pedestal as Sif and the warriors formed a protective line around the stricken gatekeeper. The rainbow bridge was theirs to defend, and with Heimdall's sacrifice, its power was theirs to wield against Loki's coming onslaught. Lucian's heart hammered in his chest as the rainbow bridge flared to life above Jane Foster's rented house in Old Bridge, New Mexico. I've teleported him straight here, Jane had said. His new allies might be able to help. And with that, a cascade of prismatic light splashed across the suburban night. One by one, Lucian and his friends, Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Logan, Bruce Banner, Betty Ross, Thor, Jane Foster, Eric, and Daisy were swept through the portal. Seconds later, they stood in the modest living room, blinking at one another in stunned silence. Damn it! What just happened? Lucian finally burst out. Through the front windows, 3 gleaming Asgardian warriors advanced across the lawn, helmed and armored in bronze and gold, blades drawn. At their sides strode the warrior goddess Sif, spear at the ready. Beyond them, the rainbow bridge arched against the midnight sky, and the faint outlines of majestic palaces drifted on the horizon, the very realm of the Norse gods. Lucian's carefully plotted plan lay in ruins. Of course, he should have anticipated a butterfly effect. Tampering with space, time, and divine portals was a recipe for chaos. Now they were caught in a crossfire of worlds. He pressed a hand to his mouth, forcing himself to breathe. Everyone, stay calm, he hissed, sinking behind the sofa. Tony slid in beside him, fists at the ready. Steve crouched by the doorway, shield in hand. Logan's claws gleamed in the lamplight. Bruce's knuckles whitened as he stared at his trembling palms. Lucian took a steadying breath. We need to find out what they want, and why we've been brought here. He rose, motioning for the others to follow. Together, the ragtag band of heroes walked into the front yard, uncertainty and determination etched on their faces. Whatever lay ahead in the realm of the gods, they would face it together. Lucian's lips twitched as he took in the full scope of the situation. Until now, they'd only had to contend with the Destroyer and Loki. Now, it looked as though the entire army of the god realm might be bearing down on them. On the other hand, Thor was the god realm's veteran commander. His reputation alone could sway many of its soldiers, and they only had to hold on until Odin woke. If the All-Father stuck to tradition, he wouldn't rise before morning, at least a dozen hours from now. That gave them time. Besides, Lucian wasn't entirely alone this time. He had Bruce Banner by his side, and Steve Rogers could even wield Thor's hammer. Thank goodness for allies, he thought. If he'd come unaccompanied, he'd be forced to teleport to a nearby ridge and lay low. Loki, someone called out. It really is him. Thor, who'd come to understand his mischievous brother's schemes better than anyone, flared with anger. Then he saw Lucian and the others, and his expression softened into an apologetic grimace. I'm sorry, Thor said. This is entirely a matter of the god realm, and you shouldn't have been drawn into it. I'll have Heimdall send you back now. This isn't just Asgard's problem, Lucian countered, his voice steady. If someone like Loki seizes control of the realms, Earth itself will soon face the armies of the gods. Determination lit his eyes. Since Asgard aided Midgard in repelling the frost giants, it's only right that we return the favor and help restore order in the god realm. Heimdall, propped up by 3 Asgardian warriors, forced himself to his feet. With a deep breath, he thrust his sword into the activation rune and called forth the Rainbow Bridge. If the battle turns against you, fall back immediately. I will open the bridge and teleport you straight back to Midgard. Chapter 184, Siege of the Divine Army, 5th Update. Loki stepped onto the Rainbow Bridge, the Spear of Eternity blazing in his grip, as wave after wave of God-realm soldiers followed behind him. Lucian snapped to attention and issued his orders without hesitation. Thor, fall back and stall them for as long as you can. Steve, fortify the defenses around the bridge's control core. I need 10 minutes to prepare my spell. He raised his hands and began to chant. Ever since the black wizard Old One-Eye had entrusted him with the ancient thunder magic, Lucian had dedicated himself entirely to mastering it. He suspended all other magical research in every realm, even postponing the activation of his clones, in order to focus on these lost rites. Drawing on his solid arcane foundation and daily counsel from 2 senior aurors, he finally completed his mastery of the thunder spell in the past few days, and now it was ready. Hold the main control room at all costs, Lucian continued, his voice ringing with determination. We cannot let Loki channel the bridge's power and obliterate Jotunheim. Lightning crackled around him as the soldiers braced themselves. The next 10 minutes would decide the fate of the 9 realms. Lucian surveyed the assembled heroes and spoke up first. We'll hold the entrance to the bridge's control room, he said firmly. They won't dare shell it with heavy weapons. Any explosion would destroy the Rainbow Bridge's main console, too. And since the bridge is so narrow, they can only send a handful of troops across at once. We'll face them 5 or 6 at a time. Steve cracked a confident smile, proof that he was a born tactician. He'd instantly weighed their strengths and weaknesses. On the enemy side were not only the Asgardian warriors, but also fearsome, high-tech artillery, laser cannons towering above the city. Yet as long as the control room doors held, Loki wouldn't risk unleashing those weapons. He'd have to send his soldiers in for hand-to-hand combat, and on such a confined space, the narrow bridge played right into their hands. Here's the plan, Steve continued. I'll take point with Logan, the 3 warriors, and Sif. Tony, you'll cover the rear and plug any gaps we leave. Banner, keep the Hulk in reserve until we really need him. Every hero nodded, steeling themselves. With Lucian's strategy and Steve's leadership, their chances of holding the Rainbow Bridge and keeping Loki at bay had never looked better. If we really can't hold them off, Steve said, voice steady, then let the Hulk loose. Every hand froze in mid-motion. Even Tony Stark, who'd never served under Captain Rogers, fell silent. He'd been skeptical of the old man's reputation. His father's endless hype felt like government propaganda. He'd scoffed, convinced Steve was nothing more than a string puppet do-gooder. But after witnessing him lift Mjolnir and rally the troops under fire, Tony had to admit, the legend was real. Now faced with Steve's ironclad confidence, there was no argument to be made. They recognized the wisdom in his command. Around them, the fragments of helicarrier metal groaned under pressure, enemy fire strafing the decks. The Hulk's containment unit stood ready, its restraints crackling with gamma suppression field energy, waiting for that single order. As Steve marshaled his forces, a sudden gust of wind heralded another arrival. Loki appeared at the threshold of the Bifrost control chamber, flanked by warriors from the 9 realms. He met his brother Thor's glare across the console. For a heartbeat, the 2 gods stared each other down in the heart of the assembly room. Then Loki drew himself up with a sneer, and Thor squared his shoulders, uncertain whether to take Heimdall's warning or charge headlong into a fight with kin. The tension crackled in the air, an unspoken promise that whatever happened next, they were all running out of time. Lucian arrived at the Plaza of the Gods just as the Rainbow Bridge shimmered into being. Before he could even catch his breath, he heard Loki's voice ring out across the marble expanse. Heimdall, warriors of Asgard, Lady Sif, how dare you defy the Allfather's orders by secretly returning the exiled Thor to Asgard, accompanied by a host of mortals? In the name of the King of Asgard, I charge you all with treason. Lucian's heart sank. He'd sensed trouble the moment the bridge opened, and now he found himself thrust into the center of a royal confrontation. Thor strode forward, eyes blazing, but Lucian cut him off. Brother, Lucian said, stepping between them, you should never have come back before Father woke. That disobedience cannot stand. I won't see you punished this time, but you must return to Midgard at once. When Father rises, I will plead your case. Thor's fury ignited. He whirled on Loki. Loki, why did you collude with the Frost Giants? Why did you allow Laufey to attempt the All-Father's assassination? Are you plotting to steal the throne for yourself? A tense hush fell over the gathered gods. Sif's hand drifted to her sword hilt. The three warriors of Asgard exchanged grim looks, and even Heimdall's grip tightened on his blade. Yet Loki stood unmoved, a sly smile curving his lips. As the god of deception, he lived for moments like this, and he was already weaving the words he'd use to turn every accusation back on his accuser. Lucian's older brother Thor crossed his arms and glared at him, every muscle in his broad frame coiled with anger. Lucian, seated on a gilded dais, the spear of eternity resting lightly in his hand, met Thor's eyes calmly. Brother, Lucian began, his voice steady and surprisingly gentle, how could you accuse me of trying to steal your throne? Father lies in his slumber, and Mother keeps vigil at his side. The realm of the gods cannot be left without a king, so I reluctantly accepted the regency. The moment Father awakens, I will speak on your behalf and restore you to the throne. Until then, you cannot defy his orders or sneak back in here over some petty jealousy. A murmur rippled through Thor's loyalists, torn between their love for him and the unexpected sincerity in Lucian's words. Thor's face flushed crimson. He bellowed, "Don't lie to me, Loki. Heimdall and Sif both told me what really happened." Lucian's lips curved into a faint, mocking smile. "Oh, I must have misunderstood," he replied, inclining his head. "Brother, you're letting yourself be swayed by half-truths and gossip. Surely Heimdall and his companions wouldn't lead you astray on something so trivial?" With a single graceful motion, Lucian raised the spear of eternity. "Guards," he commanded, "seize Heimdall, Sif, and anyone else spreading these baseless rumors." The palace soldiers stiffened, glancing at one another. Torn between duty and doubt, they hesitated, but Lucian's regal bearing and the spear's silent power left them no choice. Slowly, they stepped forward, weapons at the ready, to carry out their prince's orders. "Lord Thor, stand aside!" Loki's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone, fall back!" At his command, the troops of the god realm hesitated, their centuries of loyalty to Thor warring with the order they'd just received. Then, as if remembering Loki's threat, they reluctantly peeled away. Loki's eyes glowed with fury. "Do you dare defy my orders? Treason will be punished." He thrust out his hand, and the Spear of Eternity, a weapon forged to pierce the gods, hurtled toward Thor. Even stripped of much of his divine power, Thor would still be grievously wounded if that spear struck true. The soldiers behind Loki tensed, ready to swarm in the moment Thor fell. "Look out!" Steve shouted. He braced his shield and met the oncoming attack head-on, the energy blast splintering against its enchanted surface in a dazzling explosion of sparks. As the light faded, Loki bellowed, "By my command as King of Asgard, seize him!" His roar echoed down the long corridor of the Rainbow Bridge's control deck. Without another thought, the God Realm soldiers surged forward, weapons raised. Steve and a handful of loyal warriors, Thor's last remaining allies, formed a protective ring around the fallen god. They fought desperately, but the numbers were overwhelming. Bound by energy manacles and escorted by half a dozen guards, Thor, now powerless and vulnerable, was marched back toward the main control chamber. Behind him, the bridge's alarms blared, and the first volleys of the wider battle thundered to life. The war for Asgard had begun in earnest. From the vantage point of the control room, Lucian watched his allies stand firm against the onslaught. Captain America gripped Thor's hammer in one hand and his indestructible shield in the other, every blow he struck resonating like thunder. Beside him, Wolverine's adamantium claws flashed as he slashed through wave after wave of attackers, his accelerated healing ensuring that nothing, no wound, no strike, could ever keep him down. Flanking these two were the three stalwart warriors of Asgard, their massive swords carving arcs of celestial light through the air, and the war goddess Sif herself, twin blades whirling in a deadly dance. Behind them, Tony Stark never wavered. Guided by Jarvis's preternatural insight, he rained precision long-range firepower onto any gap in their line, intercepting foes before they could close. For now, not a single soldier from the God Realm had breached their defenses or dared step foot into the control room of the Rainbow Bridge. And as Lucian surveyed the stalemate, he knew that victory, though not yet assured, rested on the unbreakable bond of these 6 heroes. Chapter 185, The Storm's Roar. Get every craftsman you can find. Build a floating platform at once. Loki, having pulled back to the rear to survey the fight, recognized the tactical flaw almost immediately. The Rainbow Bridge was barely wide enough to hold 6 Divine Realm warriors abreast, and on the opposite end, 6 enemy defenders matched them step for step. Every clash was a perfect 6 against 6. Worse still, whenever the key God Realm's 6-man squad fell, their foes didn't hurl the fallen into the starless abyss beneath the bridge. They simply dumped them in front, forcing the next wave of attackers to pause and carry their wounded back for treatment. Those precious minutes of delay gave the bridge's 6 guardians time to catch their breath, to regroup. After every hard-won skirmish, the defenders could rest. The attackers remained fresh but perpetually stalled. "We can't keep this up," Loki muttered, scanning the enemy's formation. "If we don't create another approach, we'll be stuck in these endless 6-man standoffs." He turned to the corps of craftsmen already assembling temporary pontoons. Over the bridge's edge, ropes and planks took shape, forming a makeshift platform that would let reinforcements flank the enemy's position. Thunder crackled overhead, nature's own rallying cry. Even as the rain began to lash the battlefield, Loki allowed himself a grim smile. Once the new platform was ready, the enemy would be caught between bridge and sky, and the key God Realm's true assault would finally begin. Lucian surveyed the stalled conflict with growing concern. His soldiers, from the Divine Realm, already low in morale, were being slowly worn down by this endless standoff. Despite a population of 50,000, fewer than 10,000 warriors were fit for battle, and he refused to let them languish any longer. "Prepare the platform," he commanded, his voice firm. He envisioned a floating staging ground from which his troops could swarm upward, striking from multiple directions at once. Dozens of units would assault the enemy simultaneously, forcing them to reveal their defenses. Within moments, Asgard's master artisans appeared around the Rainbow Bridge, each bearing a strange golden contraption. At Lucian's signal, they activated the devices. Brilliant arcs of gold light sprang forth, weaving together into an expansive energy platform that encircled the bridge's central control chamber. No longer did soldiers need to crowd the narrow rainbow span or worry about falling during combat. From his vantage point, Lucian watched the Divine Realm forces surge onto the new platform, fanning out like ripples on a pond. But as the enemy numbers grew by the second, Steve and the others exchanged uneasy glances. "This isn't good," Steve muttered, jaw tightening as the platform buzzed with the advancing troops. The long-expected assault had finally begun, and there was no turning back. The moment the massive floating platform materialized, the God's Domain soldiers redoubled their assault. What had been a steady barrage instantly became a relentless onslaught. Every defender felt the pressure mount, their line beginning to buckle under the sheer force of the attack. Steve Rogers dropped his restraint. Wielding Mjolnir, he called down thunderbolts at intervals to bolster their counterstrike. Yet despite commanding Thor's hammer, Steve lacked the Odinson bloodline, and every crack of lightning sprang solely from the weapon. His formidable close-quarters skills helped compensate, but without true Asgardian heritage, the Thunder's power was diminished. "Banner, now's the time." Steve's voice cut through the chaos. He saw Asgard's 3 warriors and the war goddess Sif already bleeding, and Logan staggered, weapons still lodged in his flesh. They couldn't hold out much longer. Bruce Banner responded without hesitation. True to his reputation, he'd risk his life diving out of planes to save others. He surged forward from behind the cover, letting out a defiant roar as he charged headlong into the ranks of the God's Domain soldiers. Just as one of the Divine Domain soldiers raised his blade and lunged at Banner, the Hulk burst forth. "Hulk!" The massive green titan roared, sweeping his arms in wide arcs that sent countless soldiers hurtling through the air. "Hulk! Help them!" Betty cried out sharply. The Hulk paused, turned toward Betty, and gave a flat nod before charging back into the battle. With the Hulk unleashed, the tide shifted in an instant. From the edge of the fray, Loki's lips curled into a snarl of pure hatred. "These miserable mortals," he spat. "If that's the case, then let them all die." Clutching the eternal spear, he began an incantation. In moments, a colossal suit of Uru metal armor, the destroyer, guardian of Odin's vault, clattered down beside him. "Go," Loki ordered, voice dripping with contempt. "Obliterate them." The destroyer sprang forward, and its gauntleted hands split apart to unleash a searing beam of heat that knocked the Hulk off his feet. The green giant hit the ground hard, and then, with a roar that shook the heavens, he leapt back up and charged headlong at the living armor. Their clash was titanic. The destroyer's unyielding frame shrugged off blow after blow, while Hulk's thunderous punches dented and reverberated through the metal. Neither showed any sign of yielding, only the earth beneath them quaked with each devastating impact. Inside the Rainbow Bridge control chamber, chaos reigned. The Hulk and Steve Rogers fought side by side, trading blows with the invaders from the God's domain, but neither managed to gain a decisive edge. Without the Hulk's unbreakable defense holding them back, the tide of battle threatened to turn against the heroes, and Steve simply couldn't stand alone for much longer. Loki, flanked by his God's domain soldiers, watched their struggling opponents with a triumphant smirk. "So, is that all you've got?" he jeered. "This is barely a challenge." He raised his voice above the clamor. "Once they're routed, my plan is complete." A crack of distant thunder cut through the chamber. Loki glanced upward, brow furrowing. Without warning, thick, inky clouds formed over the bridge's control vault, rolling in with unnatural speed. Forked lightning flickered in the gathering gloom. "What sorcery is this?" Loki muttered, alarm edging his laughter. Nearby, Steve gripped Mjolnir tighter, but his face mirrored confusion. This had nothing to do with him. At that moment, the control room's door burst open. Lucian stepped into the light, his expression calm and resolute. He raised his right hand, index finger extended, and spoke with clear authority. "My apologies for the delay," he called out, voice echoing on the metal walls. "I was merely interpreting the runes." His eyes glowed with arcane energy. "Now, let me show you true power." He swept his arm skyward and intoned, "By the ancient covenant, I summon the storm." The overhead clouds convulsed. A deafening roar split the air as bolts of pure lightning crashed down into the chamber. The God's domain soldiers screamed as crackling arcs of electricity whipped through them, searing their armor and dropping them to their knees in convulsions of stunned pain. Steve and the Hulk exchanged a look of relief and awe as Lucian's storm seared the enemies around them. The tide of battle had shifted in an instant. What Loki had thought his final triumph now threatened to become his undoing. Had they not been bracing themselves with their weapons, the God's domain soldiers would have collapsed outright. Lucian's command of ancient magic was naturally not as refined as Old One-Eye's, but his enchanted alloy ring more than compensated. Its power boost exceeded even that of a Harry Potter-style wand. In fact, Lucian's raw magical output surpassed anything Old One-Eye had unleashed on France's famed Magic Street. Yet the true marvel was the soldier's resilience. A single lightning bolt from Lucian would scorch normal flesh on the outside and leave muscles charred and useless within, enough to render any ordinary combatant helpless. That was all Lucian needed. As his crackling storm seared through their lines, the God's domain troops froze, unable to muster a defense. Steve and the others swept in, dispatching one paralyzed foe after another, until every soldier caught in the electrical maelstrom lay incapacitated. Those still outside the storm's edge dared not advance. One step into Lucian's lightning field meant instant paralysis, and for the moment they refused to move. Lucian's telepathic command rang in Steve's mind. "Steve, flank the Hulk. Use Mjolnir to shatter the destroyer's magic armor." In the chaos of the battlefield, where the God's domain soldiers were pressing in on Lucian's allies, Steve needed no further urging. He sprinted forward, Mjolnir crackling with raw thunder, and joined the Hulk's side to confront the destroyer. Any ordinary magic, no matter how powerful, was useless against that enchanted armor. Only Mjolnir's divine force could breach its defenses. As Thor hurled lightning after lightning, each bolt drew on the natural energies around them. Steve's own sorcery only served to maintain the link between hammer and storm. The thunder itself came straight from the sky. If his body could withstand the strain, the electrical onslaught would continue unabated until dawn, or until Odin stirred from his slumber. Lucian watched with narrowed eyes. "Let's see how long he can hold out," he muttered. Overhead, arcs of pale blue lightning struck the destroyer again and again. At first, the armored colossus stood firm, but then, hairline fractures spidered across its iron shell. With every crack, Hulk's roars grew louder, his fists battering at those weaknesses, until finally, with a thunderous crash, the armor splintered. Freed from his magical restraints, the Hulk surged back into the fray like an unstoppable avalanche. The God's Domain soldiers recoiled, their formations crumbling under the combined might of the Green Giant and the Thunder God. From the sidelines, Loki's lips curled in fury and disbelief. He swept his gaze over the battlefield, then barked out orders to his remaining troops. "Form up! Protect the destroyer at all costs!" But even as his voice carried, the tide had already turned. Lucian breathed deeply, steeling himself for whatever came next. The enemy's lines were breaking, and with Odin still asleep, it was up to them to seize this moment. Chapter 186, The Smart Thor, Second Update. The God Realm had deployed 10,000 soldiers. After the prolonged battle, fewer than 1,000 of them had actually fallen, meaning 9,000 still pressed in around us. At Loki's signal, the entire force surged forward. Above them, arcs of lightning crackled, but Loki knew those bolts alone couldn't strike so many foes in time. He had already conceived a plan. The lightning spell was clearly being channeled by the mortal wizard Lucian. If he could lure every jolt of energy toward the ranks of the God Realm's army, he could use the ensuing distraction to slip behind the mage and finish him off. Once Lucian was dealt with, the lightning would instantly collapse. Then the gods could storm the control room of the Rainbow Bridge, thrust the Eternal Spear into its mechanism, and obliterate Jotunheim in one decisive strike. So while the soldiers pressed on without pausing for fear of thunderbolts, Loki left a phantom decoy at the rear. Clutching the Eternal Spear in his right hand and a dagger in his left, he melted into the fray and crept silently toward Lucian's position. Lucian could taste the malice dripping from Loki's grin long before the dagger left his hand. "You lowly mortal, go to hell!" Loki snarled, thrusting the blade toward Lucian's kidney. Lucian didn't flinch. Instead, he summoned the psychic barrier he'd spent years honing. A faint ripple of violet light pulsed around his torso, halting the dagger mid-thrust. Loki's eyes widened as the steel quivered in the invisible force. "You think you can break me?" Loki jeered. "You really don't take the road to heaven. You break into hell!" Lucian's lips curved into a cold smile. His body expanded, muscles coiling beneath his shirt. In his right hand, he maintained the shimmering aura of ancient magic. With his left, he seized Loki's ankle and yanked him from the bridge's gleaming surface. Loki screamed as he swung helplessly. He managed to point the Eternal Spear at Lucian, but the motion was too slow. Lucian slammed him face first onto the Rainbow Bridge, once, twice, until the sapphire planks cracked beneath the impact. The spear clattered free of Loki's grip and skittered away. Before Loki could mutter another spell, Lucian hoisted him up and smashed him down a third time. Only when Loki lay gasping and half-conscious did Lucian release him. Breathing hard, Lucian stepped back and surveyed the damage. Cracks spidered across the bridge's surface, but his quarry, the elusive thief, was nowhere in sight. He'd sensed Loki's malicious approach the moment he arrived. As a psychic, Lucian could never ignore that kind of aura. He'd meant to intercept the thief first, but Loki's ambush forced his hand. Lucian crouched beside the fallen godling and threaded a pair of enchanted cuffs around his wrists. If the thief resurfaced, he'd need every advantage he could muster. Tomorrow he'd worry about the bridge's repairs. Tonight, he had an immortal god to question. Had Loki been truly ruthless, willing to unleash a massive divine weapon without a second thought for the Rainbow Bridge, they would have been in real trouble. Yet, to everyone's surprise, this universe's Loki was just as unpredictable as his cinematic self. Obsessed with delivering a perfect waist stab, he practically threw himself at Lucian, offering his side on a silver platter. How could Lucian refuse such an open invitation? As Loki lunged, Lucian wove a magnetism spell, halting the dagger's trajectory and pinning it in midair. Before Loki could free his blade, Lucian unleashed his greatest trick. he grew to colossal height. With a single earth-shaking blow, he crushed the would-be king of mischief. It's a common misconception that anyone who stands at the back, hurling long-range spells, must be weak in close quarters. Many believe assassins have mages figured out, an idea that holds true in most worlds. But Lucian was one of the rare exceptions, a true melee mage in the vein of fairy tale's finest. "Enough!" Lucian roared, cutting off the storm of thunder and lightning. He hoisted Loki's unconscious body onto his shoulder and bellowed his command. At the sight of their would-be king Loki bound and defeated, the soldiers of the god realm immediately ceased their assault. They hadn't dared strike at Thor, even though now, with Odin sleeping and Loki in chains, it would have been the perfect moment. Lucian broke the uneasy silence. "Handle, fly to Asgard and fetch my mother at once." Thor emerged from the main control room and turned to one of the god realm officers. Though still formally under arrest, he obeyed Lucian's telepathic command without hesitation. With Odin unconscious on his throne and Loki secured in the dungeons, the realm's highest authority was Frigga, queen of the gods, and Thor knew she trusted him implicitly. The officer saluted crisply and sprinted toward the golden towers of Asgard. Moments later, the sky tore open with the hum of engines, and Frigga's distinctive ship-shaped craft descended. She leapt from its ramp with her robes billowing behind her. "Everyone, stand down!" Frigga declared, her voice carrying above the clatter of weapons. "We will wait for Odin's awakening before making any further decisions." As the soldiers reluctantly fell back, Frigga swept aside her attendants and hurried toward Thor. She closed the distance in 2 strides and wrapped him in a relieved embrace. Thor returned her hug, his expression a mixture of gratitude and resolve. Together, they turned back toward Lucian, ready to face whatever came next, united by blood, duty, and the fragile hope of peace. Thor's footsteps echoed through the silent halls of Asgard's throne room as he hurried toward his mother. "Mother, what's happening out there?" he asked, breathless with concern. He had been stationed by Odin's side and knew nothing of the turmoil beyond the palace gates. Frigga brushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression grave. She motioned for Thor to come closer and in low tones recounted everything he had yet to hear. When she finished, her gaze fell on the motionless figure at Odin's feet, Loki. A soft sigh escaped her lips. "In truth, I've always felt something was wrong," she admitted. "Loki has always been too willful, too stubborn for his own good." Though Frigga lacked prowess in martial combat, she was no novice in matters of magic, and she had long suspected her mischievous stepson of darker designs. Still, she never imagined he would go this far. Thor knelt beside Loki, anger and confusion warring in his eyes. "Mother, what are you saying?" Frigga reached out to steady Loki's limp arm. "I know it's hard to believe, but Loki isn't Odin's true son. He's the child of Laufey, the frost giant king." Thor recoiled. "Laufey? But that's impossible." Frigga held up a hand. "It's true. When Loki was born, he was barely the size of a human child. The frost giants cast him aside without mercy. Your father had just bested Laufey in battle and found the abandoned infant. He brought the boy home and raised him as his own." Thor pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to absorb the revelation. "So all this time?" Frigga placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know. It changes everything you thought you knew about him. But remember, love and loyalty aren't dictated by blood alone." Thor stared at his fallen brother, the weight of his mother's words settling over him like a shroud. Outside, the fate of Asgard trembled on the brink, but within these marbled walls, the bonds of family had just been irrevocably altered. Frigga placed a gentle hand on Thor's shoulder as they stood in the marble-pillared hall of Asgard. "He hopes you will one day rule the gods' domain," she began, her voice both proud and wistful. "And that Loki will return to Jotunheim to become king of the frost giants. If that happens, our 2 realms might finally live in peace." Thor frowned, considering her words. Then his face brightened. "No wonder I always thought Loki looked so different from me, and why he never grows a beard. Pale skin, smooth features, of course, he's a frost giant." He laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Don't worry, Mother. I won't hold it against him. Loki may not be my blood brother, but he's still my brother. That said, he won't be causing mischief on my watch." Frigga's smile widened. "That's reassuring, but your father is right. You could benefit from staying in Midgard a while longer. You might even pick up a bit of wisdom. Thor rolled his shoulders with a good-natured shrug. Wisdom, huh? Well, if I can get along with the Guardians of the Galaxy, I suppose I'm already halfway there. Frigga laughed softly. Indeed, you share more of their spirit than I ever imagined. Hidden behind one of the columns, Lucian listened to the royal siblings with a half-amused grin. Asgardian politics might be complicated, but from where he stood, at least the drama here seemed entertaining. Lucian remembered watching Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3 for the first time. The moment Adam Warlock appeared on screen, he'd instinctively known that Warlock belonged with the Guardians. His sharp intelligence and regal poise were exactly the kind of presence Thor now embodied. When Thor finished recounting the battle, Queen Frigga stepped forward, her voice warm and melodic. "Honored guests of Midgard," she said, "thank you for coming to my son's aid. Please join us in Asgard and rest." Having heard Thor's praise of their courage, Frigga personally welcomed Lucian and the others into the golden halls of the palace. Chapter 187, The Heart Nerve of the Frost Giant King, Update 1. This looks impressive enough, but all that gold is a little over the top. The visitors trailed behind Thor, Queen Frigga, and the other Asgardians as they made their way deeper into the realm. Everywhere they looked, soaring spires and gleaming halls combined cutting-edge technology with mythic splendor. Tony Stark, never one to stay silent for long, could only mutter a handful of nitpicks, none of them significant. When they reached the palace plaza, Lucian froze. There, sprawled across the cobblestones, lay the massive form of frost giant King Laufey, felled by Loki's treachery. Lucian reminded himself that frost giants can alter their stature at will. They typically tower over mortals at about 34 meters, but can shrink to human size when they choose. Loki himself had been born with a defect and remained permanently small, an outcast in Laufey's realm. To infiltrate Asgard and strike at Odin, the king had reduced his own form, but Loki had anticipated the move, ambushing Laufey and delivering a fatal blow. Then, in a final act of defiance, he'd hurled the body into the Asgardian square. Now, the fallen monarch was slowly reverting to his true height, 30 to 40 meters of ice-cold flesh and frost-bitten armor, an awe-inspiring testament to both his power and his downfall. Lucian's command rang out over the frozen plain. "Go!" As they passed the fallen form of the frost giant king, Lucian focused his magnetic power on the slender blade lodged in Laufey's chest. With a sharp pull, the sword flew free, and Lucian knelt to extract a cluster of shimmering nerve fibers from the giant's heart. Though Loki's trick had stripped Laufey of his ancient winter sarcophagus, his source of power, it was this final removal of his life thread that truly felled him. In his prime, Laufey had wounded Odin himself. His strength was the stuff of legend. Lucian knew those heart fibers would make a formidable core for any magic staff, perhaps even rivaling the power of Odin's own hair. Escorted through Asgard's pearly gates, Lucian and the others were led to a lavish guest suite. Heavy tapestries draped the walls, a roaring hearth warmed the room, and tables groaned beneath platters of honey-roasted game, fresh breads, and flagons of spiced mead. "Rest here a while," Thor said, clapping Lucian on the shoulder. "Mother and I will handle whatever mischief Loki has wrought in the palace." Frigga smiled kindly. "You've done more than enough, Lucian. Regain your strength." Once Thor and the Queen departed, the small company settled around the hearth. Bruce Banner, still blinking from the after-effects of Lucian's unusual tickle spell, cradled a goblet of warm wine. Banner swirled the liquid thoughtfully, then said, "It seems our theories were right. This god realm really is an alien civilization, far beyond anything on Earth. Their magic, their technology, it's on a scale we've never imagined." A hush fell over the chamber as they absorbed his words. Amid the flickering torchlight, the truth of Banner's observation lingered. Asgard was more than myth. It was a world whose hidden powers might change everything they thought they knew about the universe. "It seems there are countless cosmic civilizations out there that we've never even heard of," Tony mused, popping another piece of the divine fruit into his mouth. "But I'm not sure that's a good thing," he added, chewing thoughtfully. "Judging by the civil war we witnessed in the gods' domain and those vicious ice creatures we encountered, their technology might be far beyond ours, but their mindset isn't necessarily more enlightened. If they wanted to, they could launch an invasion of Earth tomorrow, and we'd have no defense strong enough to stop them. We should probably start making preparations now. Iron Man, Wolverine said, slicing the fruit open with his adamantium claws. What's your take on that? He handed Tony a fresh segment. By the way, this fruit is amazing. When we get back, Thor'd better ship me a crate. Tony snatched the offering. Honestly, I'm thinking of collaborating with Hank Pym, or Wonk as our new alien friend calls him, to mass-produce robot soldiers. With my armor and Pym's shrinking tech, we could build an army in no time. Stop! Lucian, formerly known as George, cut in before Tony could finish. He held up a hand, eyes serious. You have to realize robots run on programming, and alien civilizations wield technology leagues ahead of ours. If we unleash an army of machines built on primitive code, those same invaders could easily hack or override them. We'd end up handing our defenses right into their hands. Wolverine exchanged glances with Tony. He's got a point, he grunted. If we're going to prepare for an alien threat, we need something more secure and adaptable than off-the-shelf robots. Tony sighed, wiping juice from his chin. Fine. No robot army for now, but we still have to figure out how to level the playing field in case the universe comes calling. Lucian nodded. Agreed. Let's start with gathering intelligence, mapping out known alien species, their tech levels, their political alliances. Only then can we hope to stand a chance. As Wolverine lobbed another slice of fruit toward Lucian, Tony leaned back, already calculating their next move. The universe had just grown a lot bigger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Lucian watched Tony Stark stare at the battleships hovering beyond the balcony rail. He'd tried to warn him. If someone cracks your program, your robots could be hijacked, turned against Earth, and if a criminal or an alien managed it, we'd be defenseless. He paused, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want Stark dreaming up another Ultron or an even more dangerous AI that might decide to re-evolve humanity. Some threats you can prevent before they ever take root. Whenever people try to win a war before it begins, he added quietly, innocent lives get sacrificed. History has proven that time and again. Captain America nodded in agreement. We're not at war yet, Tony. Let's not build a weapon we can't control. Tony shrugged. Relax. I'm just thinking out loud. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Stark was brilliant, but stubborn. He'd only change course if he'd been forced to admit he was wrong. Those seeds of robot creation were already sown. Sooner or later, they'd sprout. And Lucian couldn't shake the feeling that when they did, the world might pay the price. Lucian let out a slow breath. This wasn't as dire as he'd first feared. After all, Ultron only came into being because Tony Stark had meddled with the Mind Scepter. Without that artifact, Stark couldn't have built the neural network needed for true artificial intelligence. And with Loki locked away in the God Realm's prison, awaiting Odin's waking judgment, the Chitauri invasion would soon vanish into myth. Tony, unscarred by trauma, wouldn't feel compelled to build a robot army. Even if he did, any threat would emerge much later. By then, Lucian's own power would have grown enough to handle it easily. About an hour later, Thor returned, his golden hammer swinging at his side. Father Odin has awakened, he announced, eyes bright. He wishes to see you, and personally thank you for your help to the God Realm. Already? Lucian sat up, surprised. In every telling he'd seen, Odin didn't stir until the next morning. Could the All-Father have awakened early, or was he merely feigning sleep? Lucian rose to follow Thor down the marble corridor, curiosity and anticipation swirling in his chest. Whatever awaited him, this meeting with Odin promised answers, and perhaps the next step in his journey. Lucian watched the screen in silence. The moment the Rainbow Bridge shattered, Odin sprang from his chambers in Asgard and swept Thor and Loki to safety. It almost felt too convenient. If Loki hadn't let go in that instant, both brothers would have survived. At worst, the bridge would collapse, and it could be rebuilt in time. Odin would regain his eldest son, and his younger son would have learned his lesson. Yet he could have predicted how extreme Loki's anger had become, or his stubborn refusal to admit defeat. As expected of the All-Father, Lucian thought wryly, the one who claims to unite the 9 realms is a cunning old fox. He followed Thor and the others down the long, torchlit corridors toward the Great Hall of Asgard, his mind still turning over Odin's true character. A benevolent king? Hardly. If Odin truly cared for the realms, he wouldn't have unleashed Hela's armies in the first place, subjugating countless kingdoms, looting their treasures to forge Asgard's golden spires. After sealing Hela away, he erased the bloody details of that war and commissioned a grand mural on the hall's vaulted ceiling to glorify his own triumph. And buried deep in his vault lay the Infinity Gauntlet, proof that power meant more to him than peace. Lucian let out a quiet sigh as he entered the hall. The All-Father's legacy glittered everywhere, but he knew now that every gleaming spire and painted wall hid a darker truth. Though the gems proved to be forgeries, their very existence tells us that Odin must once have amassed an infinite collection. Why he ultimately abandoned it remains a mystery. The peace we enjoy today endures in large part because Odin's life is nearing its end. He seeks a monarch who will preserve the realm as it is, rather than reignite the wars Thor so recklessly waged in his youth. Odin views Thor's bellicosity as manageable. He doesn't see it as an insurmountable threat. Benevolent or not, Odin's judgment matters less now than the deed we accomplished. Lucian and his allies stood by Thor's side and rescued the realm of the gods. That truth cannot be denied. Chapter 188, Odin, the God of Wishing, Second Update. The grand halls of Asgard gleamed beneath shifting shafts of golden light. On his throne, Odin held the Spear of Eternity with quiet authority. Beside him stood Queen Frigga, her expression calm but resolute. At their feet, bound and kneeling, was Loki, flanked by 2 squads of the realm guards, his wrists chafed by enchanted chains. Thor entered next, escorting Lucian and the others into the throne room. He stopped a respectful distance away and announced, "Father, Lucian and the others have arrived." Odin inclined his head in acknowledgement, but remained silent toward the newcomers. Instead, he turned his gaze to Loki. A long sigh escaped him, echoing through the vaulted chamber. "Loki," Odin said, voice grave yet weary, "do you have anything more to say before the court?" Pain and frustration flickered across Loki's face. He lifted his head, meeting his father's eyes. "Father, I could have obliterated Jotunheim," he cried. "Everything I did was for you and for the realm of the gods. Why do you only see Thor's deeds and never mine?" For a moment, Loki's words hung in the air, raw and honest. Odin closed his eyes as if steeling himself against regret. When he spoke again, his tone was gentle but firm. "My son, you will have time to ponder your actions in the dungeon, reflect on your mistakes, and understand what loyalty truly means." At that, Odin raised a hand. "Guards, take Loki to the lower cells. He is to remain imprisoned for 10 years. A collective murmur rippled through the assembled guards. "A decade," one officer whispered to another, "and will finally be free of his mischief." Lucian stood silently, absorbing the verdict. Inside, he felt a quiet relief. Justice had been served, at least for now, in the hallowed halls of Asgard. Odin's mercy was the only thing standing between Loki and the executioner's block. 10 years' exile was little more than a slap on the wrist for an Asgardian who might live 5,000 years. Still, Odin's voice was stern as he addressed his wayward son. "Loki, you must reflect on your crimes. Do you dare rise against Asgard again, and you'll answer to me personally." Thor, standing nearby, couldn't resist chiding his brother. As Odin pronounced the sentence, he reached out and smacked Loki on the back of his head. Loki, who had briefly looked defeated, snapped upright and gave Thor a mocking grin. "Brother," he drawled, "have you polished your hammer yet?" Thor laughed and rapped Loki once more, this time on the rump. "By the time you're back on your feet, Mjolnir will be ready and waiting." The Asgardian guards seized Loki's arms to haul him away. As they passed Odin's throne, the All-Father fixed Thor with a disappointed glance. "Still unable to lift Mjolnir, are you?" Odin's tone was quiet but firm. Thor's smile faltered, replaced by a respectful bow of the head. "Father, I have learned my lesson. I swear never to risk war with Jotunheim again. Please, lift your ban on Mjolnir and end my exile." Odin shook his head gently. "Your vow is a start, but as long as the hammer's enchantment holds, you have not yet grasped the true meaning of responsibility. Until you can lift Mjolnir, you remain in exile." With that, Thor bowed once more and withdrew, the weight of his father's words, and the weight of his hammer he could not lift, heavy in his heart. "When will you be able to lift Mjolnir again?" And when will you return? Odin called after Thor as he prepared to depart. Thor paused at the threshold of the Grand Hall and glanced back with a grin. Perhaps I've only just escaped the dungeon, all right? Don't expect me back so soon. Loki, flanked by 2 armored guards, leaned forward eagerly. He'd clearly overheard Odin's remark. Rest assured, father, he drawled. I'll return before he does. Thor merely chuckled. Truth be told, he wouldn't mind lingering in Midgard a little longer. Being with Jane felt far more appealing than rushing back to Asgard. We'll see, he replied with a shrug and strode off. Once his sons had Odin turned to Lucian and the others gathered behind him. You have my deepest thanks, he said, voice resonant with gratitude. Had you not intervened, Loki's plot would have succeeded. To show my appreciation, each of you may make one reasonable request. Really? Daisy's eyes lit up. Then could I have a chest of gold? Jane, standing at her side, squeezed Daisy's arm. We hardly did anything, Daisy. Asking for gold is a bit much. Daisy stuck out her tongue mischievously. I was just kidding. Odin's stern features softened into a gentle smile. A jest is welcome, but no wish will go unheeded tonight. He raised a hand, and a faint glow shimmered in the air around them. Speak freely, my friends of Midgard. Gold is as plentiful in Asgard as stones, Odin declared. When we depart later, I'll have someone prepare a chest of it for you. Daisy's eyes went wide with surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so generous. What about the rest of you? She asked. Odin turned to Jane. After a moment's thought, Jane answered, If it's possible, I'd like to study astrophysics. Anything you can share about the cosmos. I feel the same, added Professor Eric. As scientists, neither he nor Jane could resist the promise of new knowledge. But if it's too much trouble, please don't worry. Odin nodded. Not at all. I'll have scholars gather the relevant texts and send them with you. Finally, Odin looked at Bruce Banner. Bruce hesitated, then said quietly, I want to be rid of the Hulk, to become an ordinary man again. My wish is the same, Betty Ross said, stepping forward to squeeze Bruce's arm. Bruce had always struggled to keep his emotions, and his alter ego, under control. That night, Lucian and Betty didn't even dare to be close. Both of them were terrified he might shift into the Hulk in the middle of it, with disastrous consequences. At last, Odin fixed his gaze on Lucian and spoke. I cannot completely expel the Hulk from your body, Odin said quietly. He is the living manifestation of your other self, woven into your very soul. To cast him out would wound you deeply. However, if I help you integrate with him, you will master the transformation instead of fearing it. Lucian exchanged a hopeful look with Betty and nodded. Then let's do it, he answered. If he could summon the change at will and remain in control, he'd never hurt anyone again, and that was all he wanted. Odin extended his hand. Almost before Lucian realized it, an unseen force lifted him into the air and held him before the All-Father. Pressing his palm to Lucian's forehead, Odin began chanting in ancient Asgardian. Golden light flared from his fingertips, enveloping Lucian in a radiant glow. The brilliance pulsed once, twice, and then as suddenly as it began, it faded. Odin withdrew his hand and allowed Lucian to drift back to the workshop floor. It is done, he announced. Lucian blinked, blinking again as he felt a vast humming power inside him. But for the first time, it felt melded with his consciousness rather than at odds with it. He sat up and murmured, I can feel it. Something's different. Everything feels connected. Betty let out a relieved laugh and hurried to his side. Lucian took her hand and stood, a calm determination in his eyes. Then let's find out what I can truly do, he said. An indescribable exhilaration flooded Lucian's senses as Hulk's indomitable consciousness fused seamlessly with his own. It was as if a missing piece of himself had finally snapped into place. Lucian felt the surge of power ripple through every fiber of his being. In a heartbeat, his body swelled with muscle and emerald skin, yet his expression remained calm, devoid of the customary rage. He leapt into the air, soaring nearly 8 meters high, heart hammering with excitement. For a moment, he reveled in it, this newfound control and strength. But Banner's cautious voice whispered reminders of purpose, and Lucian let his form shrink back to human size. His clothes hung in tatters, threads drifting like cobwebs around him. Stepping forward, he bowed deeply to Odin and to Betty, who stood respectfully at the All-Father's side. Thank you, Your Majesty Odin, Lucian intoned, offering a polite nod to Betty as well. Odin's ancient eyes glittered with approval. He raised an open palm and spoke a single word, "Restore." At once, Lucian raised his own hand. A swirl of silver light danced from his fingertips, weaving the shredded fabric back together with perfect precision. In seconds, Banner's clothes were whole again, the spellwork seamless. As the last thread snapped into place, Lucian allowed himself a moment to marvel at the All-Father's might. Odin had forged peace across the 9 realms, toppling foes far more fearsome than any ordinary conqueror. Even Hela, who once crushed Mjolnir in her bare hands, had been sealed away by Odin's will alone. Lucian shivered, not from cold, but in awe at the power that stood before him, and at the limitless potential Glenn's fusion had awakened within himself. Now you see the full, terrible extent of Odin's true power. Chapter 189, Enchanting Siren Lorelei, 3rd update. Master Odin, may I request a lesson in Divine Realm technology? Odin regarded Tony with a steady gaze. Over the course of his travels, Tony had already witnessed marvels of celestial engineering that far surpassed anything he'd ever encountered on Earth. He believed that if he could tap into even a fraction of this knowledge, his Iron Man suit would ascend to an entirely new level. He admitted to himself that when he first crossed paths with Thor, he'd paid little heed to the so-called Divine Realm. But after setting foot in this realm, fighting alongside the gods in recent battles, and touring the halls of the immortals, Tony had undergone a complete change of heart. Thor might be formidable in battle, but when it came to grasping advanced technology, he was surprisingly unenlightened. The Divine Realm's engineering lay light years beyond earthly science. Just look at the Rainbow Bridge. No matter where you are in the universe, it can instantly transport you or your allies with unparalleled mobility. And unless its power source is deliberately shut down, the bridge can channel enough energy to obliterate an entire planet in mere minutes, a feat Earth's technology can't even dream of matching. The technological level of the Divine Realm surpasses Midgard's by millennia, Odin summarized. Yet our science is bound up in magic. It differs greatly from your Earth's technology. If you wish, I can commission scholars to select those innovations most suited to your world's development and share them with you. He paused, his gaze drifting past Tony Stark before settling on Captain Steve Rogers, still gripping Mjolnir. Admiration shone in the All-Father's eyes. As a mortal, I am astonished by your worthiness, Odin said. You lifted Mjolnir without faltering. Tell me, what is it you desire? Steve shook his head. Over the decades, he had sacrificed everything, his friends, his freedom, the life he once knew. Only his steadfast spirit remained. I ask for nothing, he replied quietly. If I could have one wish, it would be to return to the moment before I was frozen, to make that date I never kept. Very well, Odin nodded. You shall keep your shield. He raised his voice, summoning the court smiths. Have the dwarf king forge Uru into it and weave runic enchantments throughout. From this day forward, you need only will it, and the shield will come to your hand. With Steve's request granted, the All-Father turned his keen gaze toward Logan. Logan couldn't hide his grin as he leaned forward. I heard from Thor that the wine up here in the realm of the gods is leagues better than anything we get on Earth, especially those barrels Father hid in the deepest cellars. They're supposed to be the finest vintage in the entire universe. I was wondering, could we possibly claim one of them? He'd lived nearly 200 years, and if he were honest, his one true desire was to bring back all the friends and family he'd lost. An impossibility, of course. Odin, standing nearby, caught the edge of that longing in Logan's voice. The All-Father glanced at Thor, who casually tilted his head skyward, as though the rafters were suddenly fascinating. Yet Thor's hand slipped out of sight to give Logan a quick, conspiratorial thumbs up. Thor and Logan both prided themselves on being men of hearty tastes, and a good drink ranked near the top. Only days ago, in the house Jane Foster rented on Midgard, Thor had offhandedly mentioned the fabled wine barrels his father had hidden away. Logan surprised him by remembering every detail. It was a small victory, but Thor approved. At last, Odin's booming voice filled the hall. Very well, he said, stroking his beard. I've safeguarded those barrels for more than 2,000 years. I'll spare you one barrel, just one. A ripple of excitement passed between Thor and Logan, but Odin's gaze shifted, pinning Lucian the moment he finished speaking. Lucian, the young Midgardian wizard, had sensed the god's power the instant he stepped into this hallowed chamber, and that awareness had not gone unnoticed. The Allfather's stern eyes narrowed as he prepared to address the newcomer. Lucian stood before the High King's throne in the Hall of Yggdrasil, his cloak still damp from the mists of Midgard. At the throne's zenith sat Odin Allfather, sovereign of the divine realm, and yet even he could not escape the terrible prophecy he alone had foreseen, the twilight of the gods, an end so absolute that not even a god could alter its course. And yet, the moment Odin's one good eye fell on Lucian, the tapestry of fate quivered, as if some hidden pattern in this mortal mage might bend destiny itself. Odin inclined his head. "Wizard of Midgard," he boomed, voice echoing through the vaulted hall. "What is it you seek?" Lucian squared his shoulders. He had traveled across realms on rumor alone, rumors of the world tree's living wood, of Uru metal wrought in ancient stars, both said to hold the power to rewrite destiny. He met Odin's gaze with steady calm. "Allfather, if you will grant it, I request one branch of Yggdrasil, but if that proves impossible, then even a shard of Uru metal will suffice." Surprise flickered in Odin's eye. He seldom wavered, not even when shaping the cosmos with his raven's whispers. Yet now he paused, then quietly nodded. "Very well, I will personally see that a green bough of the world tree is yours." Lucian's breath caught. Materials born of Yggdrasil were beyond precious. Thor's hammer haft, the shaft of the eternal spear, these were forged from the tree's own wood. Only the rarest treasures of the divine realm could rival such a gift. That Odin would consent so readily, Lucian could hardly believe it. As the Allfather rose from his throne, the hall fell silent. Lucian braced himself. Whatever lay ahead, the fate of gods and men had just been set askew, and the first step had been taken toward a future no god had dared to imagine. Lucian had deliberately tossed a fragment of the World Tree branch at Odin's feet, fully expecting the Allfather to recoil and refuse outright. Then he would press his true request, more Uru metal. In the divine realm, Uru is scarce, yet not so scarce that Odin couldn't spare a little more. A few extra ingots wouldn't harm him. Lucian never dreamed Odin would go one better and actually promise him branches of the World Tree itself. The World Tree stands at the heart of all 9 realms, its roots and boughs weaving together the cosmic web of magic in the divine realm. Every mage there must draw on its power, just as the sorcerers of Kamartaj must channel their magic through the teachings of their masters, or the spellcasters under the Waishan Emperor borrow his divine essence when they weave their most potent charms. In the Marvel cosmology, magic is never a free gift. It's always on loan, and every spell carries its own price. Even a handful of practitioners, like Gu Yi, who brazenly refuse to repay the demon god creditors, eventually find themselves beaten into settlement. Lucian's mind raced. If he could fashion a staff from the World Tree's living wood and embed at its core the heart-frost veins of the Frost Giant King, the wand he crafted might rival anything in the fairy tale world. He felt the thrill of possibility surge through him. Odin's unprecedented generosity could change the very face of magic. With his magic now amplified more than 20-fold, Lucian could summon the primal thunderstorm ancient mages once spoke of, powerful enough to shroud an entire city in crackling fury. Even Lucian himself was astonished when Odin nodded his assent to retrieving branches from the World Tree. Frigga, the queen of the gods, shared his surprise, and beneath it, a deep concern. She knew all too well how fragile Odin's health had become. Any journey to the World Tree, she feared, would only hasten his decline. She opened her mouth to plead with him, but Odin gently shook his head. Respecting his resolve, Frigga fell silent. With the matter settled, Lucian, Daisy, Steve, and the others were guided back to the waiting Ketch, Amber. Almost at once, Daisy's belongings appeared in the room, a neat assortment of gear and provisions. Lucian checked his pockets anxiously, but the World Tree branches he'd requested were nowhere in sight. 2 hours passed before a small, ornate box materialized on the table, its lid engraved with shimmering runes. Finally, the spokesman for the God's Guard approached Steve. "Your shield," he announced, "is nearly complete. Once its forging is finalized, it will be dispatched to you via the Rainbow Bridge." Steve nodded, relief spreading across his face. Daisy and the rest exchanged excited glances, while Lucian carefully opened the runic box. Inside lay several gleaming shards of the World Tree, each pulse of its living essence promising the power he needed, and so they waited, every heartbeat echoing with the promise of new magic, new weapons, and the trials yet to come. The battle was over. One by one, the champions returned to the Rainbow Bridge's main control room, and Heimdall, fully restored by the god's healing stone, was escorted back to his home in Old Bridge Town. Far below, in the dungeon of the Divine Realm, Loki lay on his bunk, idly tossing his dagger from hand to hand. He barely noticed the hush that fell over the corridor, until a sultry voice drifted through the shimmering energy barrier of the cell next door. "Isn't that the Prince of the Gods in chains? What's a royal like you doing down here?" Loki pried himself off the mattress and peered across the translucent wall. Leaning casually against the far cell's edge was a woman with fiery red hair and impossibly full lips. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she smiled at him. "So you're the infamous banshee Lorelei," Loki said, an amused lilt in his voice. Lorelei traced a fingertip along her bottom lip. 6 centuries ago, her voice had rallied a vast army and nearly thrown the 9 realms into chaos, until the divine legions crushed her rebellion and sealed her fate in this very dungeon. "Little brother Loki," she purred, "care to join forces and stage a little prison break?" Loki's expression darkened with interest. He set the dagger aside, rose to his feet, and leaned toward the barrier. "Banshee, you might just be the brightest prospect I've encountered in ages." Chapter 190, New Clone, Misaka number 9981, Update 1. Jane Foster stood at the base of the X-Fighter's boarding ramp, handing Thor a neatly folded slip of paper. "Thor, we're going to stay here a little longer, study the astrophysics files your father gave us, and we'll return to New York in about a month. Here's my address. If you have some free time, please come see me." Thor's eyes lit up. "Jane, I swear I'll find you." "Good," she said, smiling. "Now hurry up. Everyone's waiting." General Eric Powers watched anxiously as Thor bent to kiss Jane's hand, then turned and stepped aboard. With the ramp sealed, Lucian, formerly George, exchanged a look with Isa. "All right," he said. "Let's get airborne and head back to the academy." From the tarmac, Thor watched their X-Fighter taxi away. Stranded on Earth without his divine might, he was now a powerful man among mortals, and that came with its own hardships. His bond with Jane had deepened into something real, though they still hadn't defined exactly what. And with Mjolnir remaining immovable, its enchantment saying only the worthy may lift it, Thor's journey to reclaim his former glory, or to forge a new path entirely, lay just beyond his grasp. Once Steve stepped off the jet, Thor discovered that Mjolnir lay utterly still. Without Steve's presence, the hammer would not obey him. Determined to prove himself worthy again, Thor resolved to take Lucian's advice. He would enroll at the academy and immerse himself in the study of peace, striving to internalize Odin's teachings. Only by understanding true harmony, he believed, could he lift his hammer once more and reclaim his divine power. Aboard the X-Fighter, Wolverine sat beside Steve, swapping stories over a bottle of wine he'd smuggled back from the realm of the gods. Not far away, Betty Ross and Bruce Banner exchanged shy glances. If they'd been traveling alone, they might have slipped off together to Yunshan to rediscover what they'd lost over 5 long years of separation. But with their comrades so near, they kept a cautious distance. Betty afraid that an emotional surge could trigger her transformation into the Hulk, and Bruce determined to protect her from herself. Tony Stark, ever restless, had no patience for lingering. The moment they cleared Earth's atmosphere, he peeled off in his suit and rocketed away to delve into salvaged godly technology. Meanwhile, the X-Fighter hurtled back toward the secluded academy grounds. Once they were overhead, Lucian deactivated the magical barrier enveloping the campus. The jet then touched down smoothly on the hidden runway, its landing gear folding away as it slipped quietly beneath the earth, ready at last to bring its passengers home. Lucian stepped off the fighter jet and spotted Professor X waiting on the tarmac. "Professor, you're still up this late?" he called out. Professor X offered a tired smile. "I'd fallen asleep, but I woke the moment I sensed your return." In truth, he hadn't slept a wink. Lucian and the team had been overdue, and he'd feared they'd run into trouble. Lucian returned the smile. "Perfect timing. Let me introduce our newest ally, Thor Odinson of Asgard. Yes, the thunder god you've read about in mythology. He nodded toward the jet's ramp, where a broad-shouldered figure was just landing, deep in negotiation over sharing Logan's wine. Professor X's eyebrows shot upward. Lucian, you're kidding. He dealt with aliens before, but never deities. Lucian patted his shoulder. Let's talk while we walk. As they made their way back to base, Lucian filled him in on every discovery and hazard they'd encountered. At last he concluded, from now on, he'll be heading your unit. Professor X exhaled, half amused. Of course, I never expected mythic gods to turn out to be another species. He shook his head, both bewildered and intrigued. Lucian stepped out of the observation room, where he'd handed Thor over to Professor X, and made his way back into the combat simulation chamber. Without pause, he set to work crafting a new wand. All through the night, his eyes heavy, his hands steady, he bound a slender branch of the World Tree around the pulsating heart of the Frost Giant King. By dawn's pale light, the wand was finished. He lifted it, flicked his wrist twice, and closed his eyes in relief. This feels so much better, he murmured. There was no denying the practicality of his alloy magic ring, light, compact, and easy to slip on when a fight broke out, but it lacked the drama of a wand. Think about it. You come across a weathered stick on the roadside, and you can't help but pick it up and wave it, pretending you're casting a spell. An iron ring lying in the dust? It's just an iron ring. You wouldn't bother to snatch it up, let alone pretend it holds any magic. Now, with this new wand in hand, Lucian finally looked and felt like a true sorcerer. Lucian stowed his magic wand back in the dressing alcove, right where he always kept it for quick access, and decided to test its power one more time. Stepping into the center of the room, he raised the wand and spoke the incantation clearly. Luminous flicker. A blinding beam of light, nearly as bright as noon sunlight, shot out from the tip. Lucian's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. That amplification was at least 25 times stronger than the best advanced lighting spell he knew. If he really cranked it up to that level in a crowded area, it would leave everyone temporarily blinded. Grinning, he finished his trial with a gentle command, Somnus. Immediately, the shadows in the corner of the room thickened and curled inward, as though coaxing any living thing nearby into a deep, dreamless sleep. Perfect. Tucking the wand away once more, Lucian returned to his quarters for a much-needed shower before bed. The water soothed his weary muscles, and he felt the day's tension ebb away. But just as he was drifting off, a sudden, searing pain shot through his mind and body. He knew exactly what was happening. The fracture was coming again. In an instant, everything went white. When the world reformed around him, Lucian's head swam with new memories, countless fragments cascading into his consciousness. Academy City, Psychic, Misaka Makoto, Mass Production Psychic Program, Absolute Psychic Evolution Experiment, Misaka 99981. He swallowed hard and sat up, heart-pounding. This wasn't his world, but another realm where people wielded supernatural powers. Here, psychics were ranked on a scale from level 0 all the way to level 5. Lucian took a steadying breath. He'd awakened yet again in a universe of extraordinary abilities, and now he had to find a way to survive it. Academy City, often called School City, is the world's gathering place for psychics. Within its boundaries lie dozens of universities, hundreds of primary, middle, and high schools, and more than 1,000 research institutes, all serving nearly 2.3 million residents. 80% of them are students, most living in dormitories where they hone their supernatural abilities through experimental drugs, hypnosis, electrical stimulation, and intensive study. Yet despite these cutting-edge methods, 60% of espers stall at level 0 and can scarcely wield their powers. Technologically, Academy City stands 2 to 3 decades ahead of the outside world. Completely autonomous and independent of any government, it leads the global scientific community. Among its many projects is Lucian's current clone, Misaka 9981, born of the Mass Production Esper program and the Absolute Ability Evolution experiment. The Academy City Research Institute's so-called Mass Production Esper project began when its scientists stole the genetic blueprint of Misaka Makoto, one of the city's most powerful level 5 espers, and attempted to clone her. They injected host cell cultures with experimental compounds, ZID-02, RIZ-13, HAL-03, and in just 14 days, each culture developed into a fully formed body identical to Makoto's. Advanced neural conditioning rigs then imprinted basic skills, speech patterns, motor reflexes, ethical reasoning, directly into the clones' brains. Each new Misaka Sol cost 180,000, about RMB 8,900 to produce. The goal was nothing less than an army of level 5 espers. But when the researchers began systematic testing, every clone stalled at level 2. Even if they'd flooded the city with 20,000 of these replicas, they still couldn't overpower a single genuine level 5. Faced with this setback, the project's backers scrapped mass production and refocused all resources on a new objective: the Absolute Esper Evolution Experiment. Chapter 191, Superpower Enhancement, Second Update. Lucian leaned forward, the pale glow of the lab's holoscreen reflected in his determined eyes. He'd seen plenty of brutal experiments during his time at Academy City, but nothing as twisted as the Absolute Ability User Evolution Program. Compared to the Mass Production Ability User Initiative, this is infinitely more cruel, he muttered, fingers brushing the tablet's edge. Before him, the Academy's supercomputer, dubbed the Tree Diagram Designer, displayed the latest calculations. According to its cold logic, the only way for a 5th-level Esper to ascend to the Divine 6th level was to defeat an equally powerful opponent 128 times across as many battlefields. In theory, a single run of 128 victories against Misaka Makoto, herself a top-ranked 5th-level Esper, would trigger that evolution. In practice, however, the Academy had no access to 120 clones of a 5th-level Makoto. Their solution was horrifyingly simple: manufacture 20,000 Makoto clones and send them all to die. The plan is for Accelerator, Lucian read aloud. Our current star Esper, ranked number 1, must wipe out every one of these 20,000 clones in individual trials. Only then will he breach the gap between level 5 and level 6. A chill ran down Lucian's spine as he scrolled to the progress bar. 9,981 defeated. Clone number 99981 had fallen in the last indoor simulation. Another young girl whose life was forfeit to cold ambition. With each fallen clone, Accelerator inched closer to godhood. With each death, the Academy's moral decay deepened. Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, wrenching himself from the screen's hypnotic pull. He knew he shouldn't be here, but knowledge, once unleashed, couldn't be unlearned. Ahead lay a crucible of power and cruelty, and somewhere in that furnace, choices would have to be made. I told you I don't want to be an animal anymore. I want a human body, a man's body, not a woman's. Lucian groaned as he blinked to open his eyes and surveyed his reflection. The pink and white sailor uniform clung to the figure in the mirror, a 14-year-old girl. He ran a hand through his shoulder-length hair and sighed. Of course, this was Misaka Makoto's form, one of Academy City's most famous espers, and decidedly not the adult man he'd asked for. He couldn't help but replay his recent experiments in his mind. The first transformation had produced an 11-year-old boy. The second had left him as a small magical cat. The third, a giant panda. Now this was his fourth and latest attempt, a perfect copy of Tokiwadai's celebrated electric shock princess. It was accurate, sure, but not exactly what he'd had in mind. Still, he had to admit the upside. His ability to manipulate magnetic fields felt more refined than ever. Whoever, or whatever, had designed this power evidently had a twisted sense of humor, but they delivered on performance. And what performance she was. Misaka Makoto ranked third among Academy City's 7 level 5 espers, those few whose power teetered on the brink of the legendary Unseen level 6. Codenamed the Super Electromagnetic Railgun, she was celebrated as the strongest electro-ability user in the entire city. As a second-year student at the prestigious Tokiwadai Girls' Middle School, she had earned the titles Ace of Tokiwadai and Invincible Electromagnetic Princess. In short, Makoto's mastery of electromagnetic fields was unparalleled, exactly the boost Lucian hadn't realized he needed. In truth, Lucian's power is essentially the same magnetic ability he inherited from Magneto. The difference lies in emphasis. Take Misaka Makoto, for example. She's honed her magnetism for power generation, casually controlling currents on the order of 1 billion volts. Magneto, by contrast, wields magnetism as a direct weapon, bending metal to his will. After Apocalypse's enhancements, Magneto could hoist battleships, derail trains, even rip the very stadium beneath his feet from the Earth, and some legends say he nearly reversed the planet's entire magnetic field. Lucian, however, is nowhere near that level. Right now, he can only manipulate a few thousand pounds of metal at most. He dreams of more refined feats, generating electromagnetic waves, performing microscopic manipulations, but he simply lacks the mastery and theoretical grounding. Even if he buried himself in textbooks, he wouldn't achieve them overnight. It's like handing a novice a finely crafted sword. An untrained hand will let it flail and clatter, while a true swordsman can turn it into a graceful, deadly extension of his will. Lucian has the raw edge of the blade. It's the technique he still needs to learn. Lucian's command of magnetism was nothing more than that of a self-taught amateur. He'd never had a mentor and had worked everything out on his own. His favorite tactic was to manipulate needles or blades into silent, lethal projectiles. Misaka 9981 herself was only a level 2 Electromaster clone, but the moment Lucian fused her residual electromagnetic patterns into his own, his magnetic aptitude surged to the equivalent of a level 4 Esper. What's more, the data implanted in Misaka 9981's neural pathways contained fragments of Misaka Makoto's signature techniques, channeling electric currents, generating raw electromagnetic force, even broadcasting on radio frequencies. Now, whether through his original body or any of his clones, Lucian could bend magnetism and metal at will, unleash searing high-voltage arcs, or flick coins with pinpoint accuracy. "Hey," a cold, curious voice cut through Lucian's thoughts. "You emotionless puppet, didn't expect you to survive that last hit." Lucian glanced up. Across the debris-strewn courtyard stood a gaunt boy with stark white hair and eyes ablaze with madness and murderous intent. Accelerator, the unrivaled level 5 Esper of Academy City, was staring him down. "Still alive? All right, I'll send you off again." Accelerator's pale eyes flicked to the shattered pillar at his feet. With a casual reach, he brushed his fingers against the broken stone, and the fragment leapt into the air, hurtling straight for Lucian like a missile. Lucian didn't bother raising a magic barrier. Instead, recalling the technique he'd learned from Misaka 9981's data imprint, he shifted the pillar's magnetic energy into a burst of high-voltage current. He thrust out his hand, making contact with the speeding stone. In a flash of electric blue arc, the pillar reversed course and shot back toward Accelerator. But it never struck its target. Where it should have hit, an unseen force halted its progress, leaving the stone fragment hovering a moment before dropping harmlessly to the ground. Accelerator stared at Lucian, his expression crackling with surprise. "No, you're not a puppet. Puppets don't put out that kind of power. You're the real body? But you weren't anywhere near this strong before. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating." With a forceful stomp, Accelerator drove his heel into the concrete floor. The ground buckled and exploded outward, sending a storm of rubble flying at Lucian with bullet-like speed. Lucian braced himself as the jagged stones bore down, every muscle tensing for the impact. Lucian flicked his wrist, and the iron gate beside him sprung to life, hurtling through the air to block the oncoming hail of stones. In the same breath, he vanished from sight and reappeared diving down the hidden staircase just behind the gate. Accelerator's vector control ability, the power to redirect any force or energy at will, was not to be underestimated. Yet Lucian knew better than to go all out here. They were still inside the research complex's test wing, every hallway and corridor bristling with surveillance cameras. A team of scientists was undoubtedly monitoring their every move, analyzing any sign of Lucian's true strength. It would be suicide to reveal more than necessary. Better to withdraw, find cover, and plan his next steps in secret. Thanks to the memories implanted from Misaka 9981, Lucian already possessed a rough understanding of this world, but countless mysteries remained. Drawing attention now would only complicate matters. Running away? Accelerator's incredulous voice echoed down the stairwell. He paused, eyes narrowing, clearly stunned to see Lucian retreat rather than fight on. Under normal circumstances, Accelerator's clones obey every command without hesitation. Like lifeless machines, they neither flee nor beg for mercy. Destroying them carries no weight on his conscience. Yet today, one broke formation and ran. Why? Fear? Do these puppets even possess human emotions? Accelerator's eyes narrowed to pinpricks. With a thought, 4 miniature tornadoes sprang to life behind him, their winds whistling with deadly promise. He launched himself forward on that vortex of air, hurtling toward the stairwell where Lucian had disappeared. "This can't be," he muttered, voice low and edged with curiosity. "You're improvising a new tactic, aren't you? Very well, let's see what you've got." And with that, he dove after the fleeing figure, intent on discovering exactly how and why Lucian had dared to break free. Chapter 192, The Mutated Misaka Clone. Why is Clone 9981 suddenly this powerful? The question rang out through the observation room, where every researcher was glued to their monitors in stunned silence. Until this moment, the trial had proceeded exactly like the previous 9,980 experiments. As soon as the match began, Clone 9981, equipped only with a Level 2 electrostatic ability, was supposed to be effortlessly dispatched by Accelerator. The recovery team was already on standby to collect the body when the unthinkable happened. Clone 9981's corpse twitched, then convulsed, and finally sat up. Instruments flashed red, measuring an explosive surge that pushed her output to Level 4. "Abort the test, right now," barked the lab director, slamming his hand on the console. "No one is to kill her. Secure her alive and bring her back for immediate examination. We've just witnessed a Level 2 clone mutate into Level 4 mid-battle. If we can replicate this phenomenon, mass-producing high-tier espers will no longer be science fiction. Level 2 subjects have been nothing but a waste of time." With that order, alarms blared and automated defenses sprang to life, sealing off the arena. Every scientist and soldier in the facility mobilized, determined to retrieve the one clone whose unexpected evolution might rewrite the future of the program. Level 2 espers aren't much stronger than armed civilians, but Level 4s are a different breed altogether. A single Level 4 can overwhelm any ordinary person, and if they could be produced en masse, they'd have the power to upheave the entire world. In the monitoring station, a researcher's eyes went wide as he scanned his console. Subject number 9981 isn't responding, and he's destroyed his tracking implant. We've lost his signal. The lab director slammed his fist on the desk. "How is that even possible? Activate every nearby sensor network. Find him now." High above the city streets, Lucian dropped from the 5th floor of the abandoned complex, his superhuman muscles absorbing the impact as he hit the ground. With a flick of his hand, he summoned a magnetic pulse that shredded the tiny monitoring device welded to his forearm. Then, invoking a low-level illusion, he blurred his silhouette and slipped away from the building, leaving Accelerator's frantic pursuit fruitless. Once clear of the compound, Lucian flexed the metallic wings unfurling from his back and soared above the rooftops. Academy City's sprawling skyline glittered below him. He hovered there, heart pounding, and let himself finally think about what he'd just done and what he planned to do next. Lucian's mind raced as he watched the electromagnetic gun fire and coins spin through the air. He was certain he'd seen moves like these somewhere in his past life. Some anime protagonist wielded similar powers. Yet the details were hazy. He rarely watched anime, so the source eluded him. Still, if magic existed in the world of his clones, it stood to reason this world might follow the same rules. Oddly, his memories implanted in Misaka's clone held no reference to such techniques. He settled on a plan. First, locate the real Misaka Makoto. As the linchpin of this world's story, any extraordinary powers or technologies would likely revolve around her. Her clone might offer clues, but the original Misaka would know far more. With that settled, Lucian let his thoughts roam. Why had someone scattered his consciousness across alternate realities? Perhaps, he thought, it was a twisted form of backup life. If his original body perished in one universe, his mind could simply awaken in another clone and keep going. Determined, Lucian strode away from the demonstration site. His priorities were clear. Find Misaka Makoto, uncover the origins of these uncanny abilities, and, if possible, discover why he'd been cast into this strange game of infinite lives. As long as at least one of his counterparts survives in any universe, Lucian can't be erased forever. But ideally, he wants to keep his original body in the main Marvel world alive. Every time his soul splits to spawn a new clone, that fracture weakens the prime self. If the original dies and only a few offshoots remain, he probably won't be able to generate any more clones. There's a second reason to preserve the original. Each clone carries its own unique gifts, and those talents accumulate across the whole collective. The more clones he has, the stronger and more versatile he becomes. For example, one clone who crossed into a Harry Potter-style universe inherited deep wizarding blood. Another who drifted into the fairy tale realm gained feline reflexes and enhanced magic power. And a third from the magician's apprentice world developed exceptional strength and stamina, like a mystical panda. Even in this world, his Misaka clone's supernatural abilities layered on top of his own. Finally, spreading himself across different worlds lets him cherry-pick new powers and skills from each reality. The original Lucian and all his clones can pool those abilities, giving them fresh tricks and hidden advantages no matter where they turn up. Lucian stood on the threshold of yet another world, yet he wasn't starting from zero. He carried with him every scrap of power he'd acquired in the Harry Potter realm: spells, charms, and arcane secrets that outmatched any ordinary wizard. He also bore the magical arsenal he'd mastered in fairy tale, spells that blended seamlessly with his Potterverse abilities. Now, in this fourth domain, he began with the full complement of his past magic and superhuman gifts stacked together, each layer amplifying the last. But raw power alone wasn't enough. Over time, Lucian had perfected the art of creating clones, each one an extension of his own mind. If one body could study a new spell or superpower at a given pace, 2 bodies could learn twice as fast, 3 bodies 3 times as fast, and so on. Every clone was a fresh brain, ready to pursue a different line of inquiry or practice a new technique in parallel with the others. Still, Lucian knew how fragile these duplicates could be. If a clone died, all the progress it had made vanished with it. So whenever he awakened a new duplicate, his first priority was always to ensure its survival, fortifying its defenses, stabilizing its magical core, and laying down every safeguard he'd learned. Only once he was certain a clone would endure did he dispatch it to scour the world for ways to increase their collective strength. Thus far, the trail of local magic led nowhere. There were no clear paths to new spells or arcane rituals. Information on superhuman abilities, however, was plentiful. Lucian split his forces accordingly. Some clones combed libraries and archives for mystical lore, while others tested and absorbed every superpower clue they could find. As each clone returned with fresh insights, Lucian wove that knowledge into his own rapidly growing repertoire. With every successful mission, the network of minds under his command grew stronger, and so did he. In this new world, equipped with unparalleled magic, a vast array of superhuman talents, and a legion of loyal clones, Lucian prepared to ascend far beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. Lucian should already qualify as a level 4 Esper under this world's power scale, but that doesn't mean he's reached his true limit. The fusion of his own abilities with the latent energy left in Misaka Makoto's clones has unlocked untapped potential. If he can learn to master and refine it, there's every chance he could shatter the level 4 ceiling and ascend to level 5. After all, Misaka herself possessed level 5 potential in her very body and rose from level 1 to level 5 through years of disciplined training in Academy City. Normally, once an Esper hits their natural cap, level 3 or level 4, that's as high as they go. Further schooling merely teaches them to better control and apply their talents. But some awaken far below their true threshold and need time in the Academy's halls to develop. Lucian knew he was one of those cases. By tapping into Misaka's dormant power and drawing upon the Academy's collective knowledge, he believed he could push himself beyond level 4. Direction manifestation, Misaka Makoto. He traced a swift rune in the air. Instantly, a golden arrow of light sprang to life, hovering before him and pointing the way. Lucian flexed his wings, launched into the sky, and followed the luminous marker across the city, determined to track down Misaka Makoto. Lucian glided through the air, his mind racing. In this world, there were no wands, so he still had to rely on hand gestures to unleash the magic he'd mastered in the Harry Potter realm. Gesture-based spells were always slower. No matter how fast his hands moved, each incantation cost him at least 2 seconds. And since this world was entirely new, finding the right wood and cores for a wand in a hurry was all but impossible. His only real solution was to learn wandless, and eventually silent, casting, an art reserved for the most powerful wizards. When term began, he vowed he would seek out Professor Snape and beg to study under him. Even with Lucian's accelerated learning rate, 5 times that of an ordinary student, he knew it would be a formidable challenge. Yet he had no choice. If he wanted to survive here, he would have to master it. Chapter 193, Temporary Base, Second Update. Masaka 9981, the disembodied voice crackled in Lucian's mind. Experimental protocol requires your immediate return to the research facility. Please acknowledge. His pulse quickened as hundreds of familiar voices, Masaka clones, echoed through the hive. This is the Masaka network. Without a word, Lucian activated his psychic defenses and severed his link to the network. Masaka Makoto's ability to manipulate magnetic fields allows her clones to synchronize their brainwaves, forming a vast telepathic web. In that shared space, they swap data, analyze situations collectively, and vastly multiply their mental processing power. But Lucian had long suspected the network was less benevolent than it sounded. The laboratory used it to monitor and control every clone. By erecting an occlusion barrier around his mind, he insulated himself and remained undetected. He reviewed what the dossier had said. The supernatural powers in this world aren't mystical talents born of mutation or cosmic radiation, as in the Marvel universe. They're the product of human hands, engineered through drugs, hypnosis, mechanical augmentations, and experimental protocols. And now Lucian was stuck in the middle of it all. Superpowers arise when the brain's personal reality reaches down into the microscopic world. Chaos theory then amplifies those tiny effects until they manifest as extraordinary abilities. In other words, the stronger your brain's raw computational power, the more formidable your superhuman gifts become. In the Marvel universe, mutants wield their powers instinctively, without any conscious calculation. That's because their abilities spring from the X gene, an unintended byproduct of celestial experiments on early humanity. Inhumans, by contrast, owe their powers to deliberate genetic tampering by the Kree, with human collaboration. Both mutants and Inhumans belong to what people call the rough stone category. Their abilities were born of experimentation, not nature. By contrast, the so-called original stones represent a pure, unengineered form of superpower. Those born under the stone's influence don't need to compute anything in their brains. Their gifts are innate. Today's artificial methods for developing superpowers are all attempts to replicate the phenomenon of the original stones, using technology and gene editing to mimic what nature once did on its own. Before Academy City was founded, ordinary people had no idea superpowers even existed. The world held fewer than 100 psychic stones, so few and so scattered that most civilians dismissed any talk of espers as pure fantasy. Lucian's sudden leap to a level 4 ability came from merging a level 2 railgun clone's power with his own instinct-driven magnetism control. By building an internal computational model, he's been able to apply scientific methods to accelerate his growth. He suspects, given the right study and practice, he could push his power all the way to level 5 or beyond. After all, he doesn't just rely on a single brain. His main body and every clone share the workload, multiplying his overall processing capacity. Found you! Outside the girls' dormitory at Changpon Middle School, Lucian hovered invisibly. Through a second-floor window, he spotted Masaka Makoto, curled up in her child-themed pajamas, blissfully unaware of the eyes watching her. Lucian pressed his back against the cool glass of the dormitory window, watching in stunned silence as chaos unfolded inside. "Sister, I swear I won't do it again," came a frantic plea. In the cramped room, Kuroko Shirai, hair pulled into bouncy twin ponytails, clad only in lacy underwear, darted back and forth through flickers of teleportation. In one trembling hand, she waved a pair of pink, frog-patterned panties like a white flag, her face a mask of desperate terror. Masaka Makoto's eyes blazed. "Heizi, you pervert! Today I'm going to cure you of that nasty habit once and for all." With that, a crackling arc of electricity shot from Makoto's fingertip. P.S. Kuroko yelped and curled into a ball, her teleportation failing her for the first time. She collapsed onto the floor in a trembling heap. Makoto finally exhaled, the electricity dissipating into the room's stale air. But the lightning-haired girl's attention snapped upward, to the window behind Lucian. "What's that feeling? Your brainwaves. Why do they feel so familiar?" Lucian's heart thundered in his chest. He knew exactly what Makoto had sensed, the unmistakable signature of her own electrical aura. He reached out with his psychic sense and, just in time, wove a mental barrier to mask his presence. After all, his current clone body was modeled on Misaka Makoto herself, down to the very pattern of her brainwaves. As Makoto's gaze swept the grounds outside, Lucian held his breath and tightened his psychic shield, determined not to let anyone discover the secret link between them. No one else could detect such faint brainwaves, but as a level 5 Electromaster, Misaka Makoto was uniquely sensitive. She gazed up at the empty sky and whispered, "Probably just my imagination." Then, with casual precision, she slipped a coil of rope from beneath her bed, bound her roommate Kuroko Shirai, and gently tossed her onto the adjacent mattress before curling up and falling asleep. Lately, Makoto had been on edge over rumors of her own cloning project. After digging through Academy City's restricted files, she'd confirmed that the program, her sister's project, had been terminated long ago. Perhaps it was time to fully immerse herself in this world as a mutated clone. Far above the dormitory courtyard, Lucian ascended to the roof. From there, he could see Academy City's sprawling skyline laid out beneath the fading light. This place was anything but ordinary. To carve out an autonomous district dedicated entirely to Esper development, maintain internal order among thousands of gifted students, and fend off outside interference, that took vision and power few could claim. Whoever was behind Academy City's creation was not to be underestimated. Best to keep his wits about him. Lucian pressed his lips into a thin line. Dig 3 feet into the ground. He swept his wand through the air, invoking an earth-boring spell that carved a fist-sized aperture through the wall of the rooftop chamber. Without pausing, he muttered a subtle expansion charm. The tiny hole stretched outward until it opened into a roomy hideout, big enough to stand in and store supplies. Finally, he added a muggle shielding enchantment, sealing the entrance against prying eyes and magical detection. With the protective barrier in place, Lucian slipped through the doorway. This clandestine space would be his temporary stronghold. In the world of apprentice magicians, those who reached magic level 500 achieved practical immortality, but Lucian had yet to hit that mark. Still, after relentless training sessions with his panda clone, he'd climbed to level 400. Though true eternal life remained out of reach, he'd already mastered the vital endurance spells that let him survive indefinitely without food or drink. His current Misaka clone body no longer needed to worry about sustenance. Instead of resting, Lucian set to work immediately. He churned through exercise after exercise in electrical control, summoning arcs of blue lightning, shaping them into precise patterns, and then dissolving them back into pure energy. Each trial honed his reflexes and deepened his command over the elemental force. Far below, in the heart of the Absolute Ability Evolution Project's research headquarters, alarms blared. On their central monitor, in glaring red letters, the report read, "Misaka number 9981 has disconnected from the Misaka network. Campus surveillance confirms she is no longer on school grounds." A hush fell over the control room as researchers exchanged worried glances. The rogue clone had vanished, and with her, whoever was pulling the strings behind this upheaval. She vanished into thin air. The junior officer glanced nervously at the supervisor. "Should we pause the operation until we relocate 9981? "Absolutely not," the supervisor replied firmly. "This could be an isolated incident. We can't abandon the Absolute Ability Evolution program over one disappearance." Tomorrow, 9982 moves forward with the first outdoor combat simulation, and the search for Lucian, formerly Subject 9981, continues without interruption. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed a button on his console. "I'll forward all the details on Lucian to the Academy's senior staff. They'll decide if any further action is required." He shook his head in disbelief. He was declared dead, and yet he's not only alive, he's unlocked new abilities. This defies all scientific understanding. Could the magic division be involved? Lucian rose early the next morning and picked up his covert pursuit of Misaka Makoto. With summer vacation in full swing, Makoto had no classes to attend, so she spent her days drifting around Academy City, exploring every corner with restless energy. Lucian tailed her from a discreet distance, determined to uncover anything that might lead him closer to the laboratory behind the sisters' cloning. By midday, he watched her befriend a cluster of elementary students who were only just manifesting their own powers. Makoto joined their impromptu football game, cheering them on as they clumsily passed the ball. Later, she was sidetracked by a girl's shiny Corker badge and spent what felt like hours scrounging change, feeding coins into a gachapon machine until she finally won one of the coveted pins. Lucian couldn't help but think, kids will be kids. But by evening, Lucian's surveillance had turned up nothing substantial. Frustration began to creep in. Was he wasting his time shadowing Makoto when she flitted from one distraction to the next? He was on the verge of abandoning the chase when everything changed in an instant. Under the glow of a street lamp, Mikoto stumbled across clone number 9982, the next girl in the experiment sequence. At the sight of her own double, Mikoto's face softened with recognition and concern. She approached the clone as though reuniting with a long-lost sister, her usual feariness giving way to tenderness. The clone, wide-eyed and tentative, leaned into that warmth. In whispered tones, Mikoto pressed her for details, where the clone came from, what the lab was like, who had overseen this trial. Observing their interaction, Lucian's mind sparked with possibility. If Makoto was determined to track down the lab through one of the sisters, if the clones themselves held the key, then perhaps he could too. Tonight at last, he had something to work with. As Mikoto and 9982 slipped away together, Lucian followed, a new plan forming in his thoughts. Use the bond between sisters to uncover the secrets hidden deep within Academy City's underbelly. Lucian had never given a second thought to the 10,000 or so clones still alive, nor did he care about rescuing them. But now, seeing how deeply Misaka Makoto worried, he began to wonder if he could leverage her influence to give those clones a chance to live openly in Academy City. If he played his cards right, he could even assume the identity of one of them, build his reputation, hone his superpower, and perhaps uncover traces of the magic he so desperately sought. On the surface, he posed as Misaka Makoto's clone number 9981. What no one knew was that a small mutation in his DNA had enhanced his abilities far beyond those of a standard clone. On the pedestrian overpass, Misaka number 9982 turned to Misaka Makoto. "You'll be sent to the next experiment block and won't return to the lab," she said quietly. "You're free to follow, but you mustn't meet the person who created us." Makoto's carefully laid plan had unraveled, and the two of them, identical in every other respect, found themselves parting ways after a childish quarrel, both a little embarrassed by the fuss. High above them, Lucian hovered on the evening breeze, watching it all unfold. He'd always assumed clones were nothing more than emotionless automatons, programmed, soulless. But what he'd just witnessed told him otherwise. These girls had feelings, hopes, and fears. And if they could feel so deeply, maybe he could help them find a place to belong. Lucian's observations today shattered the illusion that the clones were merely lesser copies of real people. In reality, their bodies were blank slates, vessels into which the scientists had forcibly downloaded every scrap of knowledge and combat training. Lacking natural growth, they moved and spoke like automatons, yet, had they been allowed to mature normally, they might have been indistinguishable from any other human. Clone number 9982 had spent only a few hours with Misaka Makoto, but even in that short time, he'd come to see her as a sister and depended on her for comfort. He'd accepted the homemade quanta rod she'd crafted for him as a gift, treasuring it like a precious keepsake. "Do you want to know the whole truth?" Lucian asked as they stepped down from the overpass. At his words, he deactivated his invisibility cloak. Misaka Makoto froze and stared in shock at the second girl who appeared beside them, another spitting image of herself. Who are you?" she whispered. "I am Misaka number 9981. The newcomer replied in a calm, measured tone. "And the one you just met was Misaka no 99982. The laboratory has produced a total of 20,000 of us." Lucian watched Misaka abruptly reach out and grab his arm. He hardly felt the pressure. Her strength was all but negligible against his own augmented body. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Have you ever heard of the Absolute Power User Evolution Plan? Lucian asked, unperturbed by her grip. Lucian spoke in a low, measured tone as he laid out the grim truth of the Absolute Power User Evolution Plan to Misaka Makoto. Before me, 9,980 Misaka clones died. Accelerator should have finished me last night. There was no reason for me to survive. Yet, at the moment of death, something inside me snapped. A raw instinct for survival, a flash of self-awareness. I broke free of the facility's containment and escaped. He paused, his expression hardening. And as for Misaka Clone 9982, he lied when he said he needed to conduct more experiments. What he really meant was that he was ordered to kill me. Misaka's eyes widened in shock. Her fists clenched at her sides, tremors of outrage shaking her frame. That's impossible, she breathed. They actually plan to terminate you 128 times over and simply swap in fresh clones? It's monstrous. She took a shaky step closer, her normally confident posture betraying her disbelief. I knew Academy City had its secrets, but I never imagined anything this inhumane. Lucian gave a curt nod. If you doubt me, let's go confront Misaka 9982 now. See for yourself how deep this conspiracy runs. Without waiting for another word, he turned and strode toward the overpass, shoulders squared against the chill evening air. Misaka hesitated, then fell into step beside him, her features a mask of grim determination. Together, they would uncover the dark heart of the project and bring its horrors into the light. It was 10 minutes to 9 when Misaka Makoto spotted Lucian striding toward the overpass. Images of the mass production of abilities project she'd uncovered in the laboratory rushed back to her, evidence that the upcoming experiment would cost clones like Misaka number 9982 their lives. Determined not to let history repeat itself, she pivoted and sprinted to catch up with him. Thanks to their linked brainwave resonance, Makoto and Lucian fell into step behind 9982 as she slipped into a deserted alley. Before Makoto could draw any closer, Lucian's hand shot out to halt her. She might be wearing a tracker, he warned, voice barely above a whisper. We need to follow quietly. Makoto's fingers found the silenced submachine gun she'd stashed inside her jacket. Eyes locked on the lone clone ahead, she asked, "What's the plan?" Lucian paused in the shadowed corridor, glancing up at the looming overpass above them. We have two ways to derail this absolute ability plan. The first is to get Accelerator to back out. No test subject, no deadly experiment, and number 9982 lives. He let that sink in before adding, then we'll figure out the rest. Here's the problem, Misaka Makoto said, pacing before the holo display. If Accelerator refuses to back down, there's no way we can outmatch him in a straight fight. Our only alternative is to track down every one of the 20-plus labs he's set up across Academy City and destroy them all. But coordinating such an attack instantaneously is practically impossible. The moment they catch wind of us, the experiment will just move and resume elsewhere. Then we're left with PEP. Lan A, I replied. Accelerator will be here in a few minutes. I'll try to persuade him to abandon the project. Misaka's eyes glowed with electric intensity. She knew she couldn't dismantle 24 facilities at once, so their best move was to break Accelerator's will. And if he wouldn't yield, she'd force him to, confident in her own power despite his higher ranking. All right, she said. Before you meet him, Lucian, fill me in on everything you've learned about Accelerator. I nodded and quickly recited the dossier I'd compiled. His abilities, his past experiments, and everything else that might give us an edge when we faced him. The Misaka clones have faced Accelerator 9,980 times. Every lesson learned in those battles is fed back through the Misaka network to each new clone, and Lucian has a copy of all that hard-won experience too. Chapter 195. Invisible monitoring Accelerator's power remains as unsettling as ever. Yet Lucian, having reviewed the recorded data from 9,980 simulated battles between Accelerator and his own clone, has begun to uncover methods to counteract it. Accelerator can redirect any form of energy simply by touching it with his skin. Kinetic blows, corrosive gases, even nuclear radiation. He doesn't just deflect physical assaults. He can suppress brainwaves too, halting mental attacks before they even register in his mind. What makes him truly terrifying, however, is his automated defensive reflex. Through the vast computing power of his brain, Accelerator programs these reflexes directly into his skin. Any energy he deems harmful is instantly bounced back at the source, and once activated, those reflexes persist even if he loses consciousness, unless he consciously deactivates them. In theory, nothing can physically harm him while those barriers are in place. Lucian's breakthrough is recognizing the key limitation. Accelerator's reflex only works on energy he understands. If an attack draws on an energy system outside his cognitive map, his defenses won't engage, because he lacks the knowledge to calculate and control that alien energy. Armed with this insight, Lucian begins formulating strategies to exploit those blind spots in Accelerator's otherwise impenetrable guard. Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. To bend any form of energy to your will, you first have to analyze it, and that takes time. Accelerator's reflection ability is incredibly powerful, but it isn't infinite. If you hurled something like a small moon, or worse, an entire planet at him, the sheer mass and energy would overwhelm his capacity to vector it away. Misaka Makoto frowned. He stopped city-crushing railgun rounds and full-power lightning bolts, though. How would a bigger attack be any different? He opened his eyes. Because every superpower, no matter how strong, is still tied to a mortal body. He has to eat. If you cut off his food supply, he starves. He needs water. Deny him that, and he dies of dehydration. He even needs oxygen. In our situation, cutting off air or water is nearly impossible, but controlling his food chain is comparatively simple. Makoto tapped her chin. And magic? The spells you use come from other worlds. They shouldn't register on his sensors at all. Even if he can quickly analyze familiar magical energy, anything completely outside his database would hit him unannounced. Exactly, Lucian agreed. If he can't perceive a form of energy, he can't vector it away. Whether it's magic or some new high-energy particle, the principle is the same. Introduce an energy he can't classify, and you bypass his defense entirely. Makoto's eyes narrowed as she absorbed this. Any energy can be controlled. Is this vector control? Precisely, Lucian replied. He straightened, his expression resolute. We just need to give him something he can't see coming. Makoto had never actually seen Accelerator in person, only heard hushed stories of Academy City's unrivaled Level 5 Esper. She knew his power was called vector control, but she had no idea how it worked in practice. If she faced him head-on, her usual electric attack would hardly graze him. Would pushing her full output make any difference at all? I've got a plan, Lucian murmured, leaning in close. He began outlining the strategy he'd devised for taking Accelerator by surprise. In a windowless wing of Academy City's 7th district, a white-haired man floated motionless inside a crimson maintenance tank. He blinked once, then muttered into the silence, "What's this boy up to now?" This was Edward Alexander, once celebrated as the greatest magician of the 20th century and the visionary founder of Academy City, now operating under the alias Aleister Crowley. His fleet of nano-robots drifted through every corridor, gathering intelligence day and night. When the director of the Absolute Evolution Program first reported the sudden leap of Clone 9981F, ROM Level 2 to Level 4, Alexander had merely raised an eyebrow. Unbelievable? Perhaps. But in a place built on miracles, even that kind of jump wasn't entirely unheard of. Lucian watched the holoscreens in the control room, arms folded, as streams of data scrolled by. The quality assessment protocol was unequivocal. Every superpower had its fixed level. Powers might occasionally spike under extreme conditions, but doubling up, gaining a second, unrelated ability, was categorically impossible. And yet the nanobots he deployed to track Clone 9981 had just gone dark. Clone 9981 was engineered to replicate Misaka Makoto's electromagnetic ability. There was no provision for invisibility. Still, somewhere above the city's overpass, the swarm had lost every trace of her signature. And then, moments ago, the clone had reappeared, face-to-face with the original Misaka Makoto. Lucian keyed his comlink. "Hold your positions. Do not engage. I want every angle covered." He tapped another console and sent the orders ahead. "Deploy the Ambu team on my mark. Capture the clone. Live if possible." When the screens flickered, Lucian leaned closer. This disruption wasn't a fluke. The Absolute Power Evolution Plan, the grand project everyone believed in, was only a facade. The previous mass production initiative for superpowers had also been misdirection. His real objective lay far beyond controlled evolution. And now, with Clone 9981's unexpected second ability, the final phase of his design was ready to begin. Lucian's scheme was deceptively simple. Use 2 false plans to mislead the magic world, then quietly scatter the artificially created Misaka clones across the globe. In doing so, he would expand the imaginary number district, once confined to Academy City, into a worldwide phenomenon. His ultimate goal was to perfect the unfinished, imaginary number district 5 elements mechanism and trigger the so-called artificial heaven. The sudden appearance of this new world would overwhelm every magician's power, causing their abilities to spiral out of control until they destroyed themselves. The unexpected rebellion of Clone No. 9981 risked throwing the entire operation off course. If the clone survived its confrontation with Accelerator, Lucian planned to let it live, at least for a time, so he could dispatch the Anbu to capture and study it. Only by understanding what caused the deviation could he refine his broader strategy. After all, even if a 4th-level clone like number 9981 teamed up with the genuine Misaka Makoto's 5th-level body, neither would stand a chance against Accelerator's unrivaled might. Misaka Makoto studied him, eyebrows raised. "Is that really everything?" Lucian met her gaze and gave a slow nod. "Yes, as soon as Accelerator shows up, Nober 9981 will fight with everything it's got. Its sole purpose is to draw Accelerator's full attention, nothing more, nothing less." "Believe me, I'll take care of everything later," Lucian promised himself. As long as Misaka Makoto drew Accelerator's attention, he could stay hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, he'd unleash the Soul Reaper, forcing Accelerator under temporary control and erasing his defensive reflexes. Without them, Accelerator would be no more dangerous than any ordinary man, completely at Lucian's mercy. And if that plan proved insufficient, the Soul Reaper's trump card, its ability to bypass all defenses, would finish the job without question. Of course, if Accelerator's famed analytical ability truly worked as advertised, he might dissect this foreign magic in an instant and mount a flawless defense. In that worst-case scenario, Lucian would fall back, dragging Misaka's original body and her line of clones into the mirror world. There, hidden beyond Accelerator's magical comprehension, they'd be safe. Any rampage he unleashed across Academy City would be collateral. He'd never discover their sanctuary. "Still," Lucian murmured, a determined smile curling his lips, "if I can beat him head-on, I won't need any of these contingency plans." He was keenly aware of the danger Accelerator posed, yet nothing thrilled him more than the prospect of testing his own strategy against such a formidable foe. If Misaka Makoto herself, specifically her 5th-level clone, could defeat Accelerator, so much the better. Lucian allowed himself a final, confident nod. It would be fascinating to witness her true power in action. "It's hard to explain, but I keep feeling like someone's watching me again." After conferring with Misaka Makoto, Lucian frowned. "Do these labs really have surveillance systems that advanced?" Chapter 196. I Have a Plan, Second Update. Lucian woke yesterday in his cloned body with that all-too-familiar prickling at the back of his mind. Someone was psychically spying on him. Only when he slipped into invisibility did the sensation vanish, so he stayed cloaked until he'd re-entered his hidden base. This morning, the same play repeated itself. He followed Misaka Makoto through the crowded streets, unrevealed and untroubled, until the moment he dropped his invisibility. Instantly, the tingle of surveillance returned. That couldn't be right. He'd searched the area and destroyed every camera and bug he'd found before materializing. He closed his eyes and poured out his psychic senses in a wide arc. What he discovered made him frown. The surveillance wasn't coming from any single device, but from countless near-invisible motes drifting all around him. Each was tiny, barely registering unless he focused his mind on it, but together they formed an intricate, intrusive net. "I told you to monitor," he muttered under his breath. With that, Lucian summoned his magnetic power. Tiny specks of steel and circuitry bent and contorted as if caught in a crushing vice. In an instant, every last surveillance mote collapsed into a shapeless heap, and the oppressive sense of being watched evaporated. Lucian's power was simple in principle, yet devastating in practice. Pure magnetism. No matter how advanced the laboratory's monitoring equipment was, Whether it was hidden behind walls or invisible to the naked eye, it all contained metal, and metal was Lucian's domain. Though his abilities shared the same origin as Misaka Makoto's, their applications diverged sharply. Misaka specialized in magnetoelectric effects, using electric currents to manipulate metal objects. Her signature move, the super electromagnetic railgun, doesn't grab metal directly. It induces currents in a metal projectile and then accelerates it to speeds over 3 times the speed of sound. Lucian, by contrast, exerted direct magnetic force, grabbing and moving metal as if it were putty. In effect, any piece of metal, surveillance cameras, armored suits, even metal-reinforced walls, posed no threat to him. Like a real-world Magneto, he could rip apart or reassemble technological devices at will. Until recently, his power level was too low for him to demonstrate this fully. But after undergoing an enhancement procedure using Misaka's clone technology, both the weight he could lift and the radius of his control expanded dramatically. While he still couldn't pluck a 5,000-ton submarine from the ocean floor, shifting 10 or 20-ton objects now felt like child's play. If Lucian could push his powers all the way to the world's 5th level, he'd become unstoppable. Now that he'd detected the tiny metal monitoring implants buried in his system, he knew they could no longer track him. "They found me," he breathed, relief and alarm warring in his chest. Across town, Alistair's eyes snapped open. His hovering surveillance loops swept in seamless patterns over every corner of Academy City, yet for the first time one of his subjects had eluded and exposed his watchful gaze. Worse, it wasn't the real Level 5 Misaka Makoto, but clone 9981, a mere Level 4 duplicate, who'd tripped the alert. That discrepancy set Alistair's teeth on edge. Something about 9981 didn't add up. "We need to secure Misaka 9981 immediately," he said into his communicator. Moments later, he dispatched the director of the Mizuho organization's Pathology Analysis Research Institute with final orders: deploy the Onbu's elite props team, each operative a certified Level 5, to apprehend the 4th-level clone at once. If 9981 could block his surveillance, Alistair risked losing control of his entire operation. He had to neutralize the threat before his plans unraveled. "He's here!" Lucian and Misaka Makoto both turned to see a white-haired boy stepping into the narrow alleyway. It was Accelerator, the Level 5 Esper. A small display on clone 9982's forearm glowed. 8:58. Jew. Sent 2 minutes until experiment 9982 commenced. Clone 9982 spoke in a perfectly even tone, devoid of inflection. Accelerator strolled forward, hands buried in his pockets, his usual sardonic grin replaced by a tense frown. "What happened to your counterpart yesterday? Why did it run off? You clones aren't supposed to have emotions, no fear, no panic, nothing." In Accelerator's mind, the clones were little more than disposable NPCs, soulless machines whose only purpose was to be defeated time after time so he could grow stronger. He never gave them a second thought. Yet yesterday one had actually fled the scene in terror. Could these clones feel? The question unnerved him. A cold dread gnawed at his confidence. At his core, he loathed the idea of harming innocents. From birth until age 9, he himself had been nothing but a test subject at the same research facility. If he, Accelerator, had once been stripped of his humanity, could these replicas really be devoid of it? The doubt twisted in his chest as the countdown continued. Chapter 7. Ever since Lucian's ability awakened at age 10, his life had been anything but ordinary. Academy City officials immediately enrolled him in a special class. He was the only student, and then shuffled him through one research facility after another. By the time he reached adolescence, he'd climbed to the very top, the city's highest-ranked Level 5 Esper. With that power came danger. Shadowy organizations from every corner of the world tried to recruit or outright control him. They sent emissaries with smiles and hidden threats, whispering promises of wealth, security, or even world-changing power at his fingertips. Lucian responded the only way he knew how, with violence. He broke arms and shattered legs to send them a clear message, but the offers never stopped. Drained by the endless harassment and determined to spare anyone else from becoming collateral damage, he eventually agreed to join the Absolute Ability User Plan. His goal was simple: become so overwhelmingly strong that no one would ever dare target him again. Now, strapped into a reinforced chair inside a cold, sterile chamber, Lucian waited. His codename Accelerator flashed silently on the monitor beside him, alongside his vital signs. Overhead, surveillance cameras angled inward, capturing his every move. A dispassionate female voice crackled through the intercom. Subject Accelerator, Misaka number 9981, exhibited an unforeseen reaction. Do not be alarmed. Proceed with the next trial. Once you have neutralized all 10,020 Misaka clones, you will ascend to a level 6 absolute ability user. Lucian's jaw clenched. Through the observation window, he watched a row of motionless clones, engineered girls known as Misakas, lay in stasis. He could feel the weight of their gazes even with their eyes closed. The heavy door to the antechamber slid open. Misaka number 9982 stepped inside, her quanta badge gleaming on her uniform. She lifted the military-grade night vision goggles from her forehead and set them precisely on the steel table. Without a word of greeting, she hoisted a submachine gun, chambered a round, and trained the barrel on Lucian. She checked her watch. 0900 hours, she announced crisply. Experiment 9982 begins now. Lucian exhaled in frustration and muttered under his breath, "This is so damn annoying." Then, bracing himself, he prepared for the assault. Chapter 12, The Final Experiment. Lucian pressed his back against a stack of battered crates, every muscle coiled as he watched Accelerator lock eyes with Misaka 9982. The clone's silver hair shimmered in the dying twilight as she raised her submachine gun. "If you want to die, then go right ahead," Accelerator said in a low, measured voice. 9982's finger tightened on the trigger. A hail of bullets tore through the alley toward him. Accelerator's eyes flickered with annoyance. With a slight motion of his hand, he warped the vectors of each round, and the bullets reversed course, smashing harmlessly into the brick walls behind him. The clone rolled to the side, heart pounding, and triggered her electrical ability. Instantly, the alley's overhead lights died, plunging everything into darkness. She slipped forward on silent feet, hunting for an opening in the shadows. But the power gap was too vast. Unhurried, Accelerator reached out with his vector control, ripping the night vision goggles from her head. In the next heartbeat, he disarmed her, snatching away the submachine gun as it clattered to the ground. "This ends now," he murmured, his tone colder than steel. He pursued the stunned clone down the ruined street, every step bringing them closer to the experiment's predetermined finale. The script was clear. If 9982 begged for mercy, the trial would end. If she refused, termination. Lucian and Misaka Makoto trailed only yards behind, weaving through upturned trash and broken glass. Ahead, an abandoned dock slanted into the river, its rusted pilings creaking in the breeze. At the water's edge, an old loading platform waited, secluded and silent. "We're here," Makoto whispered. A voice crackled through their earpieces. "You may begin." Accelerator strode onto the rotten planks as 9982 reached the far end, electricity crackling around her fingertips. She dropped into a defensive stance, determination blazing in her eyes. Lucian's heart pounded. This rickety pier would be their arena, and here, by the river under a moonless sky, Misaka 9982 would face her reckoning. Accelerator's gaze was pitiless as he spoke again. "Show me your mercy." The clone's reply was a flicker of lightning in her palm. Neither side would back down easily. Tonight, ethics and power would collide, and the final test of the experiment would begin. Experiment number 9982 was on the brink of defeat when Lucian suddenly flickered out of sight, slipping into invisibility. At the same moment, Misaka Makoto sprang forward, her gaze locked on Accelerator. "Stop!" Accelerator merely chuckled. "Oh, another one's joining the party. I didn't promise 2 experiments today, but let's proceed." With a casual wave of his hand, he summoned a roaring vortex of wind that whipped around the metal container, lifting it high before hurling it straight at the 2 Misakas. "Iron Sand Sword!" Makoto's eyes flashed. She unleashed her Electromaster power, drawing iron sand up from a 200-meter radius beneath her feet. The particles swirled together, crackling with electricity, until they formed a colossal chainsaw blade dozens of meters long. With a single sweeping arc, she cleaved the incoming container cleanly in half. Chapter 197, Accelerator is being controlled. Update 1. Controlling iron sand with that much power, is it the clone that escaped yesterday or the original? Accelerator's expression flickered when Misaka Makoto sliced the massive iron container in two as if it were paper. She whipped her electromagnetic chainsaw into a high-speed storm of vibrating iron sand, the razor-sharp particles swirling around him in a perfect 360-degree assault. At the same moment, she tossed a coin between her fingers and sent it hurtling at 3 times the speed of sound, the pinnacle of her super electromagnetic cannon. Clone or original? Does it really matter? Why did you volunteer for this experiment and kill so many people? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Accelerator merely waved a hand. The charged iron sand dispersed instantly, and his reflection ability flared to life, deflecting Misaka's full-strength blast. As he watched her recoil at realizing he was truly the genuine article, a faint smile touched his lips. "You're wrong about one thing," he said coolly. "I'm not a clone. I'm the original. But spare me your moralizing. I'm under enough stress without you lecturing me on cruelty." "I've just dealt with another batch of button-activated clones," Accelerator announced coolly. "Even if they're replicas, they're still living beings." Misaka Makoto shot back, eyes blazing. She'd prepared for Accelerator's trick, and although her ultimate attack had been foiled, she refused to falter. Summoning all her strength, she cried, "Thunder Giant, appear!" A roaring wave of electromagnetic force burst from her fingertips, ripping iron sand and dust from the ground. The particles twisted and fused, coalescing into a towering colossus, crackling with lightning, 100 meters of pulsing, metallic might. Sparks danced along its shoulders as the giant's very body hums with power. "With this move, I could level a mountain," Makoto declared from her perch on the giant's broad shoulder. Clutching Misaka number 9982 protectively, she leveled a fierce glare at her opponent. "Now, face your judgment." Accelerator pressed a hand to his masked face and laughed, a sound equal parts manic and triumphant. "Judgment, huh? Fine by me," he replied. "Frankly, this little experiment has been moving at a snail's pace. I'm getting impatient. Defeating you, the original version, will drastically shorten the time," Accelerator called out, his voice low and calm. He drew a slow breath, and the air around him stirred as he spread his arms. "Show me the true strength of your attack." "Go!" Misaka Makoto shouted. In an instant, she channeled every ounce of her electromagnetism into her fist. Lightning crackled along her arm, drawing iron sand from the ground and flinging it forward in a blinding torrent. It was as though her signature railgun technique had grown to gargantuan proportions, the air itself rippling under the force of her strike. Hidden by his invisibility cloak, Lucian crept closer to the pair. He'd studied dozens of combat logs on Misaka 9981 and knew all her standard moves, but this thunderous, iron-laced assault was entirely new. A move of her own design, no doubt, and by the looks of it, a powerful one. Lucian made a mental note to learn it himself once this fight was over. The colossal electromagnetic projectile slammed straight into Accelerator's barrier, but even at its full scale, it couldn't breach his defense. The blast met an unyielding wall of force and stalled out, metal shards clattering harmlessly in a stalemate. Clearly, Accelerator's protective field was far stronger than Misaka Makoto had expected. At that moment, a commercial van screeched to a halt in the middle of the bridge beside the pier. 4 girls piled out. One of them, tall, with chestnut hair, glanced up at Misaka Makoto, poised atop the colossal thunder giant, and sneered. "This railgun act? Hardly impressive," she declared. "Just window dressing." Beside her, a slender blonde giggled. The hooded girl at the van's open door shook her head. "Don't be so quick to judge," she warned. "She's up against Accelerator, the number 1. Underestimating her would be foolish." The brown-haired girl snorted. As level 5 Esper atomic destruction, Maye Shenli's power snapped electrons between particle and wave at will, forcing them to remain pure and unbroken. Because her ability so closely resembled Makoto's, the two were constantly compared, and Mai's rank sat just 1 notch below Makoto's. Though they'd never met, Maye harbored a fierce resentment for the girl known as the Railgun. How could she hope to match the Queen of Electromastery? Mai scoffed. The hooded girl tipped her chin toward the towering figure on the thunder giant. "Focus. Our mission isn't about bragging rights." Mai rolled her eyes, but the blonde cut in with a bright grin. "All right, our target this time is Clone No." She let the sentence hang as all 4 turned back toward the van. determination hardening their expressions. 9981, that's the one with the invisibility, so the wounded man she's holding must be clone 9982. Leader Maya peered at the black-haired girl standing silently beside her. The girl shook her head weakly. According to our intel, she's definitely clone number 9982. Number 99981 isn't here. She can turn invisible. I'm scanning for any other force field signatures. Got one. The girl pointed at the empty space just behind Accelerator. At that moment, Misaka Makoto's power reserves hit critical. Her relentless super railgun barrage abruptly cut off. Accelerator, sensing victory, leaned back, a triumphant grin splitting his face. Without warning, a figure appeared beside him in a swirl of runes and glowing light. Lucian raised his staff and hissed, "Imperio!" A wave of compulsion washed over Accelerator, shattering his mental defenses. His smirk twisted into startled laughter as he involuntarily dropped every ward he'd erected. Lucian plunged him to the ground. Accelerator struggled to raise his arms, but under the curse's sway, his reflexive shields had collapsed. Lucian seized the moment, chanting, "Condensate!" Around them, the iron-rich sand sprang to life. Lucian wove it into countless razor-thin filaments that shot forward like needles. They pierced Accelerator's armor-like skin and coiled tightly, binding him in an unbreakable iron web. Accelerator thrashed, but the wires only tightened further, pinning his limbs and cutting off any hope of escape. Bound and powerless, he could only glare up as Lucian stood over him, magic sparking at his fingertips. By now, Accelerator's vision had cleared. The Imperious Curse had never been strong enough to dominate someone with an iron will, least of all a level 5 Esper whose brain computes at lightning speed. Lucian had never intended to control Accelerator indefinitely with dark magic. "Don't even think about using your ability," Lucian warned, stepping back. "Those wires are lodged through multiple vital organs. If you trigger your power to rip them out, you'll die on the spot." Accelerator spat a spray of blood onto the floor. His pupils constricted as he glared at Lucian. "You're not the original," he hissed. "You're a copy." Lucian met his gaze coolly. "Correct. I'm Misaka, 9981, the clone you killed last night." The confession hung in the air. Accelerator's mind raced, piecing together how he'd been fooled. The Misaka who dispersed his Thunder Giant defenses moments ago, the one who bent his reflexes, none of them were the real Mikoto, but copies. Turning away, Lucian knelt beside the real Misaka Mikoto, who was slumped against a shattered concrete pillar. Her once bright hair was matted with dust, and dark circles framed her eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. Mikoto forced a tired smile. "My power's burned out, but it'll come back after a good night's rest." She managed a weak nod. Lucian drew a deep breath, glancing back at Accelerator. The battle was far from over, and the true Pawn Master still had cards to play. Misaka 9981 herself never imagined she had that kind of strength. She actually used some unknown technique to seize control of Accelerator. Staring at her in disbelief, Accelerator could only gasp. How can this be? You're just a replica. Why are you indistinguishable from a normal human?" His wild eyes shifted to Lucian, who regarded him with an almost serene calm. Tremors ran through Accelerator's frame, not but because Lucian had shattered his defensive reflexes, but because this so-called clone possessed the very same essence as any living person. If that was the case, then every other replica he'd destroyed, were they all just as human as Lucian? Chapter 198. Why Clones Are So Powerful. "Because you killed a living person," Lucian said quietly. "The clones we produced grew up too fast. We never had time to develop real emotions, so we aren't just soulless puppets." Accelerator's composure wavered. Lucian, having probed his mind with his psychic ability, sensed the crack in his ironclad facade and struck while it was still vulnerable. "You're nothing but a cold, remorseless murderer," Lucian went on, his voice steady. "If you'd spared them, they could have learned feelings and built lives of their own, just as I have." He chose his words carefully. It would be foolhardy to eliminate Academy City's #1 Esper outright. Accelerator was planning to integrate with the living clones here, to establish himself openly among them. If Lucian could persuade him to abandon his experiments on his own, everyone would be safer. And if words failed, there would still be time to act later. One could never leave such a dangerous threat at large. Accelerator's head dropped. His expression crumpled under Lucian's accusation, guilt flooding every fiber of his being. In that moment, he felt a deep urge to disappear, anything to escape the horror of what he had done. Legilimency. Lucian whispered the incantation as Accelerator slumped to the ground, his psychic defenses catastrophically compromised. Seizing the moment, Lucian dove into Accelerator's memories, sifting through the tangled thoughts until he had extracted every crucial detail. A private smile tugged at his lips. This was exactly the breakthrough he'd needed. But before he could share his findings with Misaka Makoto, a jagged bolt of green energy screamed across the warehouse. Lucian pivoted just in time, the crackling strike splintering 4 stacked shipping containers before vanishing in a shower of sparks. He inhaled sharply. A clone managed to overpower Accelerator. Maybe these power rankings aren't so reliable after all. At the far end of the cavernous space, a glowing orb of green electricity swirled around a tall, arrogant figure as he advanced. "Clone number 9981, isn't it?" he called out. "Don't make this harder on yourself. Comply now, or I'll leave you broken." Misaka Makoto stepped forward, flanked by Clone 9982. Her eyes narrowed in warning. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. And for a moment, the three of them simply stared at one another, the next move balanced on a knife edge. Maya Shenli's lips curved into a faint sneer. "We're the Ombu Props team, sent by the head of the Mizuho organization's Pathology Analysis Research Institute to apprehend clone number 9981. And for the record, I'm Maya Shenli, codename Atomic Collapse, the 4th-ranked Level 5 Esper." Lucian drew in a slow breath, his brow creasing. "So it wasn't enough to force Accelerator to abandon his experiment. You've come to intimidate me, too?" Misaka Makoto, still crackling with the last vestiges of her power, glanced between them. "Accelerator is beaten, and the Absolute Ability User Evolution experiment is dead in the water. Why go after him now?" Maya Shenli laughed, a cool, amused sound. "Don't look at me for explanations. I don't know what bigger plan you're tangled up in. Our only orders are to capture him. Move aside, and between you and me, I'd love a rematch, but you're just not worth my time." Makoto's eyes flared, but after a tense moment she gave a curt nod. "Fine, we'll stand down for now, but this isn't over." With that, she signaled to Lucian to step back, and the battleground fell into an uneasy hush, 2 sides poised, the future of the experiment hanging in the balance. "I'll handle this." Lucian extended a hand to stop Misaka Makoto's forward lunge, then strode to stand opposite Maya Chengli. "If you're going to capture me," he said coolly, "it all depends on whether a level 5 like you actually has what it takes." Maya Chengli snorted. "A mere level 4 clone thinks he's outsmarted Accelerator with a sneak attack and has the nerve to taunt me? Pathe, tick." He folded back his purple robes, sat gracefully on a nearby stone, and addressed 2 of the 3 figures standing behind him. "Jin-Chi, Frenda, go deal with her. Keep her alive. We need her for the team report." Jin-Chi, a top-tier level 4 Esper, could manipulate atmospheric nitrogen. He could lift cars to deflect bullets and generate nitrogen armor to block attacks from any direction. Frenda, though powerless, was notoriously agile and a master of homemade explosives. Even seasoned level 4 Espers dread facing her bombs. With those 2 on the job, capturing a level 4 clone wouldn't be easy. Lucian stood perfectly still as Flanda and Wonky closed in, 2 of the strongest operatives the agency had to offer. At level 5, Lucian's magnetic powers made him nearly untouchable, but neither woman flinched. "Leave him to us," Flanda called. She drew a slim custom pistol from her belt and took aim. At the same moment, Wonky snapped on a pair of shaded goggles, inhaled a blast of pressurized nitrogen from her wrist canister, and lunged forward in a single, impossible burst of speed. The bullet hissed through the air toward Lucian, but it never reached him. Less than a meter away, it froze in mid-flight, suspended as though pinned by an invisible force. Then it detonated in a blinding flash. Flanda grinned. "You see? My flash rounds, designed to blind and disorient." Before Lucian could recover his sight, she bent down, rummaged in her tote bag, and produced a small figurine that exploded into dozens of razor-sharp shards, the dreaded doll bomb. She hurled it at his feet. Sparkling shards sprayed outward, forcing Lucian to stagger back. That's when Wonky struck. Propelled by nitrogen, her fist smashed into Lucian's jaw with enough force to flip a car. Yet even as the shockwave rippled through the street, Lucian remained astonishingly composed. He closed his eyes, reached out, and caught Wan Chi's fist in midair as effortlessly as one might pluck a leaf from a tree. Wan Chi faltered, staring down at her entrapped hand. Flanda's grin vanished, replaced by disbelief. Lucian opened his eyes and gave a small, wry smile. "You're stronger than I expected." Lucian's body, forged by the genetic blessings of countless worlds, should have shrugged off a child's punch without a second thought. And yet, absorbing the impact bare-handed still stung. Blinding him wouldn't help. His psychic sight painted the battlefield in vivid detail, no eyes required. "It's my turn," he called, flexing his fingers. Instantly, a crackling surge of electricity raced from his torso, crackling along his arm and coalescing in his fist as he lunged toward Wan Chi. Lucian forced himself to hold back. He had no reason to reveal the full extent of his magical arsenal, not yet. For now, everyone suspected he was simply a mutated clone of Misaka Makoto, her famous railgun powers explaining his electric attacks and layered invisibility. But if word got out that he could summon fairy tale-style magic circles or bend elemental forces, there'd be no plausible cover story. And worse, he had no idea whether this world even recognized magic as remotely real, especially here in Academy City, where Esper research and crackdown protocols were notoriously draconian. Best not to find out the hard way. If the authorities deemed magic a threat, they'd mobilize every anti-Esper squad they could muster. And Lucian hadn't come all this way to play cat and mouse. Then again, escaping wouldn't be a problem. Apparition here, a slip into his mirror world there, and he'd vanish before anyone could blink. For now, though, he tightened his jaw, channeled just enough power to keep Wan Chi on her toes, and played the role of the most electrifying yet harmless new Esper in Academy City. Lucian hesitated. If he stayed here, he'd be far from Misaka Makoto and could easily miss any critical developments. Besides, he still needed to hone his abilities, pushing himself from level 4 to level 5. He steeled himself, braced his stance, and then, to his own surprise, electric arc's crack led across his skin. It actually stopped it! Lucian exclaimed inwardly as the current surged through him, illuminating the clearing with blue-white sparks. Watching that display, Wan Chi immediately realized close-quarters combat was a bad idea. In an instant, she exhaled a fine mist of nitrogen gas that clung to her limbs like liquid armor. The cold, pressurized shell solidified at once, shunting Lucian's high-voltage outburst aside. With her makeshift armor shielding her, she pivoted and retreated to the rear, keeping her distance from his unpredictable power. Chapter 199, The Turning Electromagnetic Cannon, Part 3. Wan Chu's eyes went wide in disbelief. Misaka Makoto's clone was blocking his strikes with her eyes shut tight. According to his intel, the railgun's strength lay in ranged attacks, not close-quarters defense, so how had her clone mastered such precision? "Frenda," he barked. Lucian slipped free from the sizzling electric field and watched Wan Chu's command met by Frenda's swift response. She pressed the detonator on a concealed bomb. Boom! The explosion roared at Lucian's feet, shrouding the area in smoke. When it cleared, he stood unscathed. His iron sand had coalesced into a sturdy shield just in time to absorb the blast. "That's enough games," Lucian said quietly. "Time to finish this." He raised his arms. The iron sand surged outward, transforming into a cloud of razor-sharp needles that hurtled toward Wan Chu and Frenda. Wan Chu didn't hesitate. He darted to Frenda's side and wove his power into a sleek suit of nitrogen armor around them both, bracing for the onslaught. Lucian's armor rang with the impact of iron needles, each one bouncing harmlessly off his plates. Wan Chi snarled, "Time to finish this," and once more began to condense nitrogen from the air into a swirling orb in his gloved hands. With a flick of his wrist, he grabbed the small containment canister at his side and flung it toward Lucian. At the same moment, Frenda produced several tracking bombs and launched them in looping arcs from multiple directions. A faint smile curved Lucian's lips. "Using Misaka's playbook won't work on me," he thought. As the canister and bombs closed in, he raised both arms and unleashed a precise magnetic field. Instantly, the iron needles lying at Wan Chi's and Frenda's feet jerked to life. They soared upward and drove into their wielders' unprotected limbs, pinning them in place. Meanwhile, the canister and tracking bombs stalled in midair, suspended by Lucian's control. In a single fluid gesture, he sent them careering back, upside down, toward Wan Qi and Frenda, turning their own weapons against them. As long as it stays within the reach of his magnetic field, Lucian can bend every bit of metal to his will. Without some kind of automatic defensive shell, like Accelerator's turtle carapace, there is no hiding from his full 360-degree assault. Mugino Shenli, a level 5 Esper, watched with a smirk as the already injured Wan Qi struggled desperately to condense his nitrogen armor for even a split second. Unable to stand idly by, Shenli flicked her wrist and unleashed a storm of green lightning bolts. In an instant, Lucian's concentrator box, his grenades, even the iron needles he'd prepared, all of it dissolved into molten slag under her crackling charge. "Time to have a little fun," Shenli purred. Unfazed, Lucian took a deep breath and reformed one iron needle between his fingertips. He held it aloft, the metal spinning slowly in midair. Then, channeling the last of his own electrical reserve through his middle finger, he snapped the needle forward with a sharp flick. He was only a level 4 Electromaster, far from the 3 times the speed of sound blasts that the elite railgun Espers could unleash, but 200 million volts behind a single needle still made for a supersonic projectile. Mugino Shenli's eyes widened as the needle streaked toward her. "A railgun?" she whispered, astonished. Mugino Shenli scoffed at the crumpled manuscript in her hands. "The original's worthless to me. This knockoff is even more laughable." With a swift gesture, she summoned a dome of crackling green energy before her. Any attack that met that electromagnetic shield would be absorbed and neutralized. No matter how fast or powerful, not even a supersonic railgun round could break through. "Not necessarily," Lucian replied coolly. A moment's concentration, and the railgun bolt that should have flown straight clawed through the air in a graceful arc, slipping around the barrier's edge to strike at Shenli's flank. He'd always been able to curve small projectiles. Now, for his power upgrade, he could redirect the railgun's shot itself. Shenli's eyes flickered with alarm. She rechanneled her barrier in an instant, barely deflecting the blast with a brilliant flash of green sparks. No sooner had she exhaled in relief than Lucian fired again. The cannon flared, and a second round looped back in an elegant parabola, slamming into the shield's perimeter with a thunderous crack. At the same time, the iron sand at Lucian's feet awakened. Billions of microscopic grains snapped into sharp needles, then swarmed upward like a metallic storm. They whirled around Shenli's barrier in a deadly pincer, each minute dart seeking the slightest gap. Caught between 2 impossible assaults, Mugino Shenli's barrier flickered under the combined onslaught of curved railgun fire and raining iron needles. She tightened her grip, determination blazing in her eyes. This fight was far from over. Mugino Shenli seethed with fury. She'd never imagined she could be outmatched by a level 4 clone, an experience so humiliating it made her blood boil. With a roar, she unleashed her full power. Spheres of green energy crackled into existence around her, then surged outward in jagged bolts of lightning that obliterated every incoming attack in an instant. "Where are you, Lucian?" she demanded, narrowing her eyes. To her astonishment, the boy who'd been standing just feet away had vanished. Shenli's pulse quickened as realization dawned. This clone possessed an invisibility trait the original body lacked. "Takitsubo," called a voice at her side. Takitsubo Riku, the level 4 ability tracker, activated her power. Her eyes glowed as she traced the faint disturbances in the air, disturbances that betrayed Lucian's hidden form. Mugino Shenli's aura flared emerald. "So it's a tracking ability," she sneered. "You can't hide forever." She slammed her palm forward, sending a spear of green lightning lancing into the spot Riku had marked. But Lucian, cloaked in invisibility, slipped away at the last heartbeat. The crackling energy scorched empty air. In the silent aftermath, Lucian crouched in the shadows, heart pounding as he catalogued the new threat before him. The battlefield had shifted once more, and he was already plotting his next move. "I wanted to keep this simple," Lucian said through gritted teeth, "but if you insist on a fight, I'll have to get aggressive." He twisted away from Mugino Shenli's latest strike, ejected his turning railgun, and simultaneously wove the iron sand in his palm into a spray of razor-sharp needles. "Try blocking this." Mugino's eyes glowed green as her electric aura flared. With a crackling surge, she swept her hand through the air, dispersing the needles in a shower of sparks. Don't be so sure of yourself. Lucian noted the brief flicker of her power settling, his chance. He summoned a pulse of high-voltage current through his body. White arcs danced along his skin, and his eyes burned with thunderous light. In an instant, he vanished from sight. Before Mugino Shenli could react, Lucian reappeared behind her. He drove his elbow into her back with bone-shattering force. She crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The electric charge around him snapped out and faded into the air. Lucian exhaled, running a hand through his singed hair. Not bad, but using electricity to boost speed isn't as easy as it looks. I need more practice. He knelt beside his fallen opponent, already thinking of ways to refine that terrifying jolt of power, an all-too-common tactic for those who mastered the art of electrified combat. They say Laxus of Fairy Tale owes his fearsome strength to his ability to suffuse his body with lightning. Few can match that feat, not even Misaka Makoto. Her physique is essentially that of an ordinary girl, able to withstand only a modest current, so the benefits are hardly noticeable. Lucian, however, is different. Thanks to the overlay of his multiple clones and the durability granted by his magical bloodline, he can endure voltages far beyond any normal limit. In fact, if he chose to conceal his magic entirely and then applied an electric shock after his giant spell had taken effect, the enhancement would be astonishing. At this rate, he might soon rival Fairy Tale's melee mages in sheer close-quarters power. Admittedly, combining giant transformation with electric stimulation and then leaping in for a brutal beatdown hardly fits the classical image of a refined wizard. Fortunately for him, Lucian isn't restricted to hand-to-hand combat. He's a true all-rounder, lethal at point-blank range, yet equally capable of laying down heavy magic from afar. Chapter 200, Lucian's Ultimatum. Boss, you actually lost. Flanda's voice trembled as she and her companions, bandages still pressed against fresh wounds, gaped at the fallen Esper. They'd faced Academy City's top powers in training, yet this level 4 clone had just defeated the 4th-ranked ability user in the entire city. How can a clone be this strong? Misaka Makoto, steadying herself against a cracked pillar, shared their disbelief. Even at her peak, she wouldn't have dared meet that level of power head-on. From atop the ruined courtyard, Lucian's voice rang out over the stunned silence. Lab directors, I know you're watching. Your ultimate weapon, Accelerator, has been taken down. The level 5 ability user you dispatched to finish us has fallen as well. Stop these inhumane experiments at once, and let us clones live like ordinary people. He lifted his gaze skyward, fist clenched. Believe me, you do not want 2 level 5s running unchecked through Academy City. I carry every detail of your clone extermination trials in my mind. The moment I go public, Academy City and the entire world will know the full extent of your crimes. Imagine how many parents would freely send their children to a school in a city shrouded in darkness like this. And what would the rest of the world think of Academy City then? Lucian had been watching Misaka Makoto's duel with Accelerator all along. He'd already spotted the small, advanced surveillance monitors tucked around the arena, but this time he let them stay intact. He wanted the lab's higher-ups, the Academy City authorities, to see Accelerator fall and to witness Lucian's power with their own eyes. He knew the reputation of a level 5 Esper, a single individual capable of standing against an entire army. Officially, Academy City claimed only 7 level 5 Espers, though rumors hinted at hidden talents lurking beyond the public roster. Of the known 7, Accelerator reigned supreme. Kakine Teitoku held second place. Misaka Makoto sat third, and Mugino Shiori ranked 4th. Now that Lucian had bested Mugino Shiori in one-on-one combat, he'd proven himself at least the 3rd strongest in sheer combat prowess. And with the city's leaders watching in real time, there was no doubt his ascent would send shockwaves through the corridors of power. Lucian had teamed up with Misaka Makoto to bring down Accelerator, and now Academy City's top brass knew better than anyone the sheer destructive power of those two working in concert. Level 5 Espers like Makoto, after all, they were still students, couldn't be treated like puppets. Each of them had their own will, their own agendas, and none could be fully controlled by orders from above. If the city's leaders wanted to avert total upheaval, they'd have no choice but to acquiesce to her demands. Of course, should they stubbornly refuse, convinced they still held a secret weapon to capture Lucian, he would have no alternative but to unveil his own ace in the hole. And if it came to that, no one could blame him for unleashing a blazing rampage that would reduce Academy City to ashes. Very well, Alistair remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Keep it on file. It could prove useful. Deep within the sealed life support chamber beneath District 7, Alistair paused before issuing his edict to the operatives below. Lucian's clone was far more formidable than he had anticipated. Any attempt to seize it by force would exact an unacceptable toll, enough to unhinge his broader designs. Though recent developments had strayed from the expected script, they remained, for now, well within the parameters of his ultimate plan. Lucian settled back in his chair, eyes flicking between Misaka Makoto and Riko Takitsubo. For now, he'd shelve any attempt to capture the special clone. There'd be better opportunities down the road. Academy City doesn't exactly suffer from a shortage of level 5 espers, he said quietly. If we play this right, having another enhanced ability user on our side could speed up the rest of our plans. He let that thought sink in, then shook his head. It's too bad I never got around to training Tuma's fantasy killer. Oh well, more sessions can always be arranged. His original scheme had been elegant in its simplicity. Dispatch the clone to lure out Kamiju Tuma, owner of Fantasy Killer, then stage a sparring match between Tuma and Accelerator as a form of training. Instead, the plan had backfired spectacularly when the combined assault of Makoto and her clone put Accelerator down for the count before Tuma even set foot in the arena. A sudden phone ring cut through the silence. Instantly, the prickly sensation of surveillance vanished. Riko's eyes widened as she checked her screen. Turning to Lucian and Makoto, she announced, "The client's payment just cleared. They've ordered the Absolute Ability Evolution Project terminated effective immediately." Lucian nodded once, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Understood," he said, already thinking ahead to how they'd repurpose their newfound asset and where to go from here. All clones will be freed and granted genuine human identities. Relief washed over Misaka Makoto's face at the declaration. Beside her, Lucian allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, evidence that Academy City's top brass had relented, at least for now. With the promise of a legal status coming his way, Lucian knew the long fight for recognition was finally drawing to a close. Just then, the Academy City ambulance thundered onto the scene, its doors flung open to take Accelerator and the other wounded aboard. As medics hurried them inside, Misaka number 99982, a younger clone standing near Makoto, shivered, turned, and spoke up. "Sister, the labs transferred the remaining 10,018 of us to the District 7 hospital. They've lifted all control measures. From now on, our freedom won't be restricted." Makoto exchanged a glance with Lucian. "So the project has truly been abandoned," she observed. With that confirmation, Lucian reached for the concealed neural interface at his wrist. Carefully, he re-established a partial link to the Misaka network. He scanned the images and data the sisters had uploaded, proof of their new autonomy. There was no longer any need to block their connection. The shared network would be invaluable: distributed memory storage, rapid calculations, collective problem-solving. Lucian resolved, however, not to expose his own memories or open the link any further than necessary. Some boundaries, he decided, would remain firmly in place. Lucian had always kept a contingency plan in case something went wrong with the Misaka network. He could sever his link instantly and slip away unharmed. Now, climbing into the second ambulance, he made sure everything was ready for a clean getaway. "Let's get to the hospital," he said. Misaka Makoto ushered Lucian and Misaka 9982 aboard the vehicle bound for District 7 Hospital. The extraction had gone flawlessly, over 10,000 Misaka clones rescued from Test Area 7, but now came the real challenge, finding each of them a safe, long-term placement. Makoto slumped into a seat, exhaustion etched on her face. Lucian took a moment to scan her expression, then offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about what happens next," he said softly. "Academy City's administrators aren't blind. You can't just ignore a network of 10,000 Level 2 espers. There will be tough questions, and they'll have to address it. Mikoto managed a small, grateful nod. Lucian tapped at his tablet to bring up the latest Esper population figures. 80% of the city has some form of Esper ability, he continued, but 60% of those are level 0s, abilities too weak to matter. Most of the rest are level 1s, and the higher you climb, the scarcer you get. We only have 7 level 5s in all of Academy City. He zoomed in on the chart, then looked back at Mikoto. There's no way they'll just sweep these girls under the rug. Something tells me they'll find a solution for every last one. As the ambulance's siren faded into the night, Mikoto leaned back and closed her eyes. Thanks to Lucian's calm confidence, hope finally felt within reach. Even though the Misaka sisters are only level 2, their extensive combat experience and shared online memory link make them a formidable guard unit, no less powerful just because they've been taken off the experiment roster. Academy City's leadership poured vast sums into their creation. Shelving the absolute ability evolution plan doesn't mean abandoning everything they built. Mikoto Misaka, as far as she's concerned, doesn't need to lose any sleep over these higher-up decisions. In truth, the sisters exist to ensure that none of them ever face annihilation again. Letting them live as ordinary citizens and apply their unique abilities to earn their keep was the only humane choice.